Hello and welcome to this, our 203rd live stream, Degenerative Artificial Intelligence. You have generative AI, and then you have degenerative AI. Which one's more likely? I wonder. Anyway, I want to welcome you to tonight's live stream where we take your questions on ancient Egypt and the Bible. And of course, our title is a reference to how our Monday teaching video on how AI could affect basically writers and scholars. So if you are interested in that, please check that out. We also want to let you guys know that this Monday, we are doing a popcorn review. Ooh, popcorn. So that's always a good time. It'll be at 8 p.m., not our regular 8 a.m. Monday release. So it'll be a premiere. I will be joining in there with you in the live chat and taking your questions as the video plays. And it's always a good time, and we look forward to seeing you there. Okay? So, the other thing is that we want to point out again that our novel, Reliquary of the Dead, will be shipping in 10 days. Okay? So if you want to get on the pre-order, now's the time to do it. And if you like science fiction and if you like archaeology, this should be a great... You'll really enjoy this read. Okay? Okay. So that takes care of our channel business. Let's get into the questions. Bubble Machine goes, popcorn, Dr. Falk. We all love popcorn. Popcorn's Nami. Dossman says, it says mine will be in my possession on the 15th. Awesome. Thank you for buying a copy. Mama, your copy is on the way. So I shipped that out yesterday. Bubble Machine, I want to read it so bad. Oh, Jack Ray, if you get scared in an Egyptian horror movie, do you really want your mummy? I don't know. I wouldn't, but just saying. Just saying. Jack Ray, oh man, I had to buy mine on Amazon. Yeah, well, beta readers get special rewards, okay? Because they put in work. Mama was one of our beta readers, okay? So she gets it as a reward. She had to work for hers. Dossman, signed? Yeah, hers is signed. Hers is signed. Mama says, Jack Ray, I had to earn mine. Yes, she did. Okay. So with that said, let's get into questions. First, the rules of the channel. Super chats have priority. That shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone. We do take non-super chats here, but you have to put a Q and a colon in front of the question before we recognize it. No Q, no colon, it might as well not exist. We don't see it. Okay? Only post non-super chats once. Question spamming will be question spamming will be punished by disqualification of your question for the night. If it is a question has to do with a verse in the Bible, we ask that you give us a little context. So with that, we need what book it's from, what chapter, and what verse. Okay. Only put one super chat per chat. Okay, or sorry, one question per chat because we don't want question stacking. Also, we do allow sponsorship of non-super chats, but we ask that you repeat the question in the super chat. Okay. Okay. So those are the rules. again, just sort of common sense stuff. All right. With that said, let's get into the questions. Taco Tuesday. Question spamming is a capital offense. Yes, it is. It used to be a problem here until we had that rule. People would put in the same question 10 times over. And it's like, stop it. We saw the question, okay? We're not going to take it. And as soon as we did that, put that rule in, the question spamming ended. You know, so. Okay. Our first question here is going to be from Darkblade. And he asks a question that a lot of people ask, actually. An issue I have with the late date is that Merneptah's campaign dating to during Joshua's leadership seems unavoidable. What resolution ideas do you have for this? Okay. It doesn't really... Okay, first of all, we have to explain that Merneptah's campaign is going to intersect with at least some biblical text. Okay? Whether it's Joshua or Judges. If you believe in an early Exodus date, Merneptah's campaign falls right in the middle of the period of the Judges. And that's unavoidable. So you really are... It's either going to fall in Joshua's leadership or under the leadership of one of the judges. So you can't avoid this issue. Each side of this debate has to engage this in some way. Okay? So it's not avoidable, but I think in the respect of the alternatives, the late date offers a better, more plausible situation here. Okay, now, we first have to understand that Merneptah's campaign is a police action. It's not a general sort of go around the whole area and collect loot. It's not a tribute campaign. It's a punitive campaign. It's a punitive campaign against the king of Gezer. Now, what happened during Merneptah's reign was he had a lot of instability. You know, following the reign of Ramses II, there was a lot of instability during his reign. So what happened is when he did his campaign into Canaan, he was really going after the king of Gezer, because the king of Gezer smelled weakness. And the king of Gezer, who was a Canaanite king at the time, he said, oh, I'm going to just start sacking these Egyptian garrison towns. You know, what are the Egyptians going to do? Okay? So you do get, you know, this thing where he's going to take Merneptah is going to go up the coastal plain, like most kings do when they travel into Canaan, and then he's going to circle through the Jezreel Valley back down into the Shephelah and then hit Gezer. Okay? So his primary target, Merneptah's primary target, is Gezer, because Gezer is creating a lot of problems for him. Once you kind of understand that, everything else in the campaign in relation to the Israelites sort of makes sense. Okay? Because we're talking around 1217 BC. The Israelites enter Canaan in around 1222 BC. So that's about a 7-8 year difference. Okay. So where are the Israelites at the time? Well, they spend the first 5 years of the conquest taking out the Amorite cities. They're not dealing with the Shephelah yet. Okay, so they've got some people there, but they're not really subduing the Shephelah. They're taking out the big Amorite cities like Hatzor, Ai, Dibon, the Heshbon. The big problem. The problem that they can only deal with as a unified group. Okay? And then after that 5 years, they go to Shiloh. And they argue for 2 years. So all the leadership of Israel isn't in the Shephelah. It's not even the Judean foothills so much as it is gathered around Shiloh to negotiate which tribe gets what piece of land. And that process takes 2 years. So while Merneptah is going into the Shephelah, beating up the king of Gezer and encountering a few Israelites. Most of the Israelites, they're over in Shiloh. Merneptah's not interested in Judean foothills. He's not doing this to secure tribute. He's pacifying one rebel Canaanite king. Okay? Now, if this had happened during the period of the Judges, it'd be a whole different matter, because there's a lot of Israelites in the Shephelah during the period of the Judges. There's not so many in the period of Joshua. So the encounter that Merneptah has with the Israelites is really sort of on the outskirts of say, Israelite holdings at the time. Darkway said the events of Joshua 14 happened 6 years after the start of the conquest. Shiloh pops up in chapter 8. Yeah, 6 years. Okay. Where are they? They are in Shiloh when Merneptah is in the Shephelah. They're not in the same place. It's a geographic propinquity. They're not in the same place. So they're not going to be intersecting. So that's a much more reasonable explanation as to why, say, Merneptah is not mentioned in, say, Joshua. Whereas you would have to come to the conclusion that, well, he must have, I mean, if he had come through during, say, the time of the Judges, where the Israelites are occupying the Shephelah, then there's going to be some widespread carnage, and then you really do have to ask the question, why wasn't this mentioned? So, Scott Worthen says, oh, I get it now. Common sense is at odds with the late Exodus daters. No, come on, really? Just 5 years in the Promised Land does not seem incompatible with Merneptah's minor military incursion. Well, that first 5 years is taking out the Amorites. That's not incompatible. That's just how it happened. And the Israelites aren't promised an entire invasion all at once. They're never told that they're going to just sweep through and clean out shop. They're told that it'll be a long process. Scripture says it's going to take a long time for the Israelites to secure the land. And that's exactly what happens. So, Jonathan Walker says, essentially, Merneptah encountered the outer rim of one of the Israelites. Yeah, that's exactly what happened. So, anyway, I hope that answered your question, Darkblade. But that's what happened. That's the history there. Otherwise, you do have to explain why the death toll was not larger and more consequential when it came to, say, something that would happen during the time of the Judges. Because that would be a big deal. Okay, so I hope that helped. Thank you very much for the question. The second question here. I'll take that follow-up question. Scott Worthen, Amorites were mentioned in Merneptah's stela, right? No, they actually aren't. The Amorites are not mentioned in the Merneptah stela. Nominally, Amorites were still allies of the Egyptians. What you do mention there, what's mentioned there is the Hurrians, the Kuru. And the Kuru were sort of the remnants of the Mitanni. Okay, so the Mitanni are mentioned, but not the Amorites. The Amorites weren't enemies of the Egyptians. They were sort of a kind of a vassal. So, yeah, it's kind of hard to keep all these factions in, in your brain, because there's so many of them and they have so many different competing alliances. But the Amorites are not mentioned in the Merneptah stela because they weren't a conquest. They weren't an enemy as such. Okay. Scott Worth and Mitanni, Hittites, and Hurrians are impossible for laymen to discern from. Yeah, that's but these are the factions. These are the factions, and you do need a dance card to keep them all straight. But once you keep them all straight, it's sort of easy to figure out what's happening. Okay, next question here is from AEUIO, and I'm not going to even attempt to pronounce that. He says, "Hi, Dr. Falk. What made you opt for the conspiracy assassination usurper take on I and Horemheb's accession?" Oh, okay. What made me opt for it was the Dakamunzo affair. Now, the Dakamunzo affair comes from the deeds of Supiluliluma the First. And what this is Supiluluma the First receives a letter. It's pronounced yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you. Okay. In the deeds of Supiluluma the First, there is this he recounts this letter that they received from a princess of Egypt, basically saying her husband had died, there's no successor to the throne, send one of your sons to become king over Egypt. Okay? And he dickers around for 3 months because he doesn't trust the letter. He doesn't trust it. Sounds too good to be true. Okay? It just so happened it was true. Okay? But by the time he sort of determines it is true and sends his son, the Egyptians who are basically vying for the throne have gotten wind of this. Okay? Now, that prince is assassinated in Canaan on the way. He's met by a basically a contingent of chariots, Egyptian chariots, who kill him on the spot. Okay? So, this is not something Egyptians are going to just do on their own. Not with something diplomatic. Okay? So, there was a high hand guiding this process of assassination. So, it fits sort of best with the period. First of all, I mean, the chronology of this fits with essentially the death of King Tutankhamun. Okay, up until that point, the Egyptians and the Hittites were at relative peace. Okay, but suddenly, right afterwards, Egypt's in a state of war with the Hittites, and there's only two competitors for the throne, essentially. I and Horemheb. They're the only two sort of when there's no princes from a major great queen, and there's no princes from a minor queen, all that's left is the administrators, former viziers and generals. Okay? And it's up to them to figure out at that point who takes the throne. Well, there's really only two that are viable options, I and Horemheb. But somebody has to assassinate the Hittite prince before he gets there. And it seems that Horemheb was a field general. Okay, so he's sent out in the field. He kills the prince. And meanwhile, I takes the throne. And we know I takes the throne because his image is put in the tomb of King Tut. Successor kings do this. They put their image in the tomb of the guy they buried. He who buries inherits. Okay. So, the only way this all works together is if there is a conspiracy assassination of that Hittite priest, Hittite prince. It's the only way it works. So that's why I opt for this. It's the only way you can sort of fit the pieces together. Darkblade says, so Horemheb ended up helping his main opponent. Yeah. Yeah. Now, interestingly enough, very interesting, when he arrives on the throne, has two sons, but he only lives 4 years, and neither of his sons survive that 4 years. We don't know if they were assassinated too or what. But it sounds like there was probably a bunch of political intrigue in those last days of the 18th dynasty. So yeah, Horemheb ended up helping his main opponent inadvertently. There was probably some sort of understanding that the kingship wouldn't be decided until Horemheb's return. But yeah, the old man snuck and just took the throne anyway. Okay, so anyway, that's why I hold to that view on the Dakamunza affair. It just sort of fits into everything we know about the last days of the 18th dynasty. Okay, so I hope that helped. Thank you for the question. It's a great question. Okay, the next question here is from Vish. And he asks, what does it mean to incorporate the Christian worldview into fiction? And any examples of what exactly could be drawn from Christianity? Any good examples in fiction where it's done well? Well, I'm going to here appeal to a guy by the name of John Gardner, who wrote a very controversial book. It was controversial at the time, it's not anymore, called On Moral Fiction. It's a masterpiece of how one writes. His thesis, Gardner's central thesis was writing books is a moral exercise. Everybody who writes a book does so with the sort of understanding that you're conveying some sort of morality through that book. Okay? So, with that in mind, it's going to come through your theme, through your premise, through your characters. And I think one of the interesting things about writing a Christian worldview is that you're going to have either one of two sort of things that you're going to sort of focus on that makes it sort of distinctly Christian. What's the nature of man and what's the nature of God? Okay? So, hey Papa, how you doing? In the case of, say, a lot of, say, moral fiction, you're going to focus on, say, how man behaves. And this could be all sorts of different themes that you want to put into the book. Like, for example, crime doesn't pay. Okay? Honesty is the best policy. You lie once, dig yourself deeper. Okay? These are sort of themes that are, say, consistent with a Christian worldview. Now, you can actually write worldviews that are definitely not Christian. Like, for example, sex is fun. Any sex is fun. Cheating on your spouse is just a minor discretion. So you can write themes. I mean, there's a horrible example right now. There was an author in Australia that was arrested for materials that are that dealt with children, and her view was really in favor of that. I mean, it was vomit-worthy quality stuff. Okay? So there's a lot of ways to incorporate a Christian or an unchristian view into fiction. But what Gardner was driving at is that every book of fiction is going to convey some sort of moral aspect. You can't do fiction without morality. So the only question then is, what kind of morality are you writing about? You know? So Bomb Papa says, there's a lot of spirit critters in my writing. Yeah, there's spirit critters in mine too. Spirit critters are fun to write about. Yeah, Jonathan Walker says, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Yeah. You see, a Christian worldview would say, what happens in Vegas doesn't stay in Vegas. You know, that would be a Christian theme. Is that, yeah, your little sin here is going to affect everything else around you and every person around you. So, um, yeah, that's the difference between a view that expresses what the Bible teaches versus, say, what the world teaches. Okay. So, and you can find lots and lots of examples of both. But it's like, okay, yeah, you can, and I would encourage you, next time you read a novel, look at what is the sort of theme and worldview it's presenting. Because it can be very, very enlightening to just look at the themes of these books. And themes are almost never explicitly said. You have to read the book to figure out what's going on. But I tend to lean towards books that present, say, a view that's consistent with the world. And that is, consistency is usually consistent with what Christianity teaches. Okay? So I hope that helps. Thank you very much for the question. Very much appreciated. Okay, the final non-super chat for our opening segment here is from Darkblade again. And he asks, are there Egyptian texts that mention Ramses and Avaris coexisting as separate sites? If so, what implications would this have for the validity of the early Exodus date? Yes. Here's the thing. They only exist as fully separate sites, and there are separate sites. They are geographically separated by 2 kilometers. And not just separated by 2 kilometers, separated by water. Okay? Avaris is on the south bank of the Pelusiac branch of the Nile. Pi-Ramesses is on an island. It's on an island, surrounded by water on all sides. Okay? They are separate sites. Whether you like it or not, they are separate and they're distant. If you look at, say, the map in Rainer Hannick's book, he shows them as geographically distant. Okay. One of the things we kind of have to realize is, in the modern world, 2 kilometers does not seem like much. That's because our perception of space has been altered by the automobile. Okay. If you had to walk between one town and another town, and 2 kilometers and a river is separating you, those are separate towns. This is why Jerusalem is considered distinct from Bethlehem, or the city of David. It's because walking distance plays into that cultural geography. Yeah, if you whip into an automobile and go 60 miles an hour, yeah, you can get to one in a few minutes, but that wasn't in the ancient world. People in the ancient world didn't view things that way. So, if you've got, I mean, this is why towns in, like, England, like Woolton is distinct from Liverpool because it was separated by distance. not much distance, but just enough that it was, in before the automobile, they were considered to be distinct cities, distinct towns. So, so it's they were separate, even if the texts don't say they're separate. Okay, but the fact is, though, that we do have texts that do seem to indicate that they were separate sites. And we do see that because of the transition of the cities themselves. For example, Avaris was... There's the only point where, say, Pi-Ramesses and Avaris sort of overlap as cities is within that first 25 years of the reign of Ramses II. Okay, that's the only time the two they coincide. Okay, completely. Avaris is an occupied city up until roughly the mid-19th dynasty, which happens to be the 25th year of, right in the middle of that 66-year reign of Ramses II. Okay, so Avaris is an occupied city, and then it's abandoned. It's abandoned except for the port. And this is where sort of we get that we can tell it's distinct. Okay, that port of Avaris is special. It's the only deep water port in the area. Even though, say, Pi-Ramesses is on an island, it has no deep water port. It depends utterly on Avaris' deep water port to accept ships to load and unload cargo. So that port at Avaris remains in operation, even though the city itself is abandoned, right up until the end of Dynasty 20. So this is where things get interesting in the texts. This is where things get super interesting in the texts. Because, for example, during the reign of Seti I, and this is before Pi-Ramesses is built, is called the Lord of Avaris. It's called the Lord of Avaris. Okay, and that's in KRI Volume 1, page 232. Okay, now you get into the reign of Ramses II, and you see a transition. You see a transition from, like, for example, in the Memphis West Hall Temple of Ptah inscription, there's a quote, "He has brought you to Avaris." And that's in Kitchen's Ramesside Inscriptions, Volume 2, page 490. But after that inscription, you start seeing Avaris no longer called Avaris, but the port of Avaris. And we see that in the Stela of Api, British Museum 332, where it talks about the key of Avaris. And this is in Kitchen's Ramesside Inscriptions, Volume 3, page 754, and it appears there twice. So we get this really interesting transition for the port of Avaris. And the port of Avaris is still always going to be called the port of Avaris. It goes by one other name. It goes by the name Peru Nefer as well, which is the formal name of the port. But this is where we see that distinction sort of split off, where you got Pi-Ramesses, but now you've got the port of Avaris too. Even though port of Avaris itself ceased to be a city people lived in. So it's clear from the texts that they were separate sites. And it's clear from the archaeology also that they were separate sites. So this is one of those cases where the archaeology is definitely agreeing with the texts. So what implications would this have for the early Exodus date? Well, I'm not sure it has too many, but it does indicate that if there was a wide-scale abandonment of the city of Avaris, it happened during the midway through the reign of Ramses II. Because that's where we see the transition from Avaris, just called Avaris as a city, to the port of Avaris that happens in the reign of Ramses II. So, yeah, there are some implications there for the early Exodus. You would really have to sort of strain the gnat to try to claim an earlier abandonment for Avaris. Scott Worthen says, Avaris was a naval power with Tel Yehudiya economic expansion over the Levant River's 14,000. It was, yeah. Yeah, Avaris was a very powerful city as far as its trade ability. Yeah. Okay, so, Darkblade, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the question. Very much appreciated. All right, let's get to the super chats. Woohoo, super chats. Up here. Okay, first super chat is from 1000 MPG for $9.99. Thank you for the super chat. Good evening, Dr. Folk. Well, good evening to you too. I was recently in a heated convo at church on what Jesus meant in Luke 23:43 by today. Does it mean right after this, soon after, or can it just mean someday? Thanks. Right, let's pull it up and let's take a look. Okay. Luke 23:43. Now, he's talking to the thief on the cross here. And the text says, and he said to him, truly I say to you, today you shall be with me in paradise. Okay. The word here is paradisios, and it's basically the realm of the blessed dead. Now, we're not sure exactly if that is the good half of Sheol or heaven itself. Paradise is not clear here, but the today is. Okay? It's essentially this day, more or less. Okay? So we have to understand that in the terms of the resurrection, Christ among the thieves that were also crucified beside him, Christ died first. Okay? Christ died first. Christ died before the other thieves. This is very, very interesting in terms of this verse. Because Christ is the first to die. He's the first to go to Hades. And he's the firstborn of the dead. So he arrives at Hades, the Abraham's bosom, before the thieves. And we do know that Abraham's bosom was considered a kind of paradise. It was a good side to be on. So, he's basically saying, okay, yeah, I'm going to go before you. I'm going before you, and I'm going to prepare the way of paradise for you. I think that's really a cool statement. Really a cool statement. So he gets there first, and he says, okay, you're going to come and I'm going to see you there in paradise. So that's what's going on. He does mean today as in this same day. And it's because he gets there before the thief. So I hope that helps. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. I'm just going to take bubble machines here that just popped up. Even though this is a bioethics question, and I don't normally take bioethics questions. Bubble Machine asks, sorry this is so vague, but this has been bothering me. Back in my debate class, we were told to debate about abortion rights. Okay. I remember one student found somewhere that the Bible supports abortion because it says something about the child not being a person yet 3 weeks in the womb. I've tried looking for where this is mentioned, but I found nothing. Do you have any ideas? Yeah, I do. This is something where, say, I know it's talking about here. Um, it's actually about a miscarriage. Okay, so they're talking about Exodus 21 here. And verses 22 and so on. Okay. And the text says, if men struggle with each other and strike a woman with child so that she has a miscarriage, and yet there is no further injury, he shall be fined as the woman's husband may demand him, and he shall be as the judges decide. But if there is any further injury, then you shall appoint as penalty life for life, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, bruise for bruise. Okay? So, it's the idea that, that if a man's basically two men struggle, and a woman with child gets in the way. Now, here's one thing. Context here is really important, because I've seen this used, taken out of context. Basically, oh, well, if this was a fully human person, it would be life for life. There's context here. The context here is that two men are struggling, and a woman with child gets in the way. She gets in the way. She shouldn't be there. She shouldn't be there. And then she gets hit. And then she has a miscarriage as a result. Now, that's the problem with using this text, is you need to supply the context. She shouldn't have been there. Okay? And yet she inserts herself into the situation, and there's an injury that results through a miscarriage. Now, the thing here with a miscarriage is you're not sure if the strike caused the miscarriage or if the miscarriage happened naturally, which could happen. This is why it's a fine, not a death penalty, because it's unclear what caused it. Okay? But she, in many ways, got involved in something she shouldn't have. And as a result, there's going to be less. Now, if she gets her tooth knocked out, well, then it's the lex talionis at that point. But you don't know. Nobody knows what caused that miscarriage. And the fact is, under most circumstances, frankly, a punch wouldn't cause a miscarriage anyway. I mean, there are pregnant women that are doing kickboxing at this point. Doesn't cause miscarriages. The fact is that most miscarriages are caused by, say, genetic defect. So, yeah, this is not a statement on whether or not the fetus is human. It's only a statement on whether it is viable. Yeah. What caused the miscarriage cannot be determined. Yeah. So therefore, you cannot penalize someone based on that. It's a clarification of law. Okay. So it's a really poor verse to use in a debate like this, because it's not talking about that at all. It's a misapplication of the verse. Okay, so I hope that helps, Bubble Machine. Thank you very much for the question. We got a second one here from 1000 MPG with the same question. I hope we answered it well the first time, but we do want to thank you for the super chat. We really appreciate your support of the channel. Okay, next one here is from Dossman for $2. Thank you very much for the super chat. Good advice for leading a Bible study. Yeah, I do have some good advice for leading a Bible study. You know what the text actually says before you go there? It's really, really helpful to understand what the text actually says before you lead a Bible study. Okay? And a lot of people who go to the Bible studies don't do this. And they should. Read the text. Read some commentaries on the text. Try to understand the text. You know? It may seem common sense, but a lot of people go to Bible studies and just didn't read the text. They read it there and they go around the room saying, well, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? How does it make you feel? So Bible studies become then a circle of shared ignorance. You don't want a circle of shared ignorance. That's just not good Bible study. Jack Ray says, oops, that's not Jack Ray. Jack Ray says, advice for studying the Bible. Study the Bible. Funny that. Strange. What strange advice? Read the book. Study the book. Apply the book. That almost sounds very expository. Rurik. All right. He says, hey, Dr. Falk, I think you missed my super chat earlier in the week. I put it earlier in the week. If it's still, let me do a check. Let me see. I can go back and I can take a look to see if it was there. I did not see it earlier in the week. But let me go take a look. I can look this up. YouTube does keep track of all the super chats. Doesn't keep track of all the non-super chats, but it does keep track of all the super chats. So let me just take a look here. Earlier in the week. Oh, okay. Yeah, I see it. Okay. Yeah, we did miss that. I don't know how we missed that, but it didn't show up. I will just read it and we will take it, okay? Or actually, what I can do is I can cut and paste this quickly. Okay, and I am going to give you probably a disappointing answer to this, though. This has not really been my wheelhouse. But I will at least honor you with actually up here. The hamsters on the computer are basically chugging. Mm. Gotta love the hamsters. All right. Come on. Come on, you hamsters. Oh, boy. Right. Yeah, it's the copy and paste that's actually the difficult part, Jack. Okay. Sport. write this one here. Okay, let's get that up. Okay, here's the question. And I'll just take that down for the moment here. Okay, Rorik for $4.99 US. Thank you for the super chat. He goes, what would you consider the strongest argument for the resurrection, and which one do you think is weakest or needs the most tweaking? All right, and I'm gonna basically say right here, this is not in my wheelhouse. There are people who specialize on evidence for the resurrection. I'm not one of those people. This is a question that would be better asked of Gary Habermas. Okay. I don't really get into evidences for the resurrection. I'm really an Old Testament guy when it comes right down to it. I do take questions on the New Testament, because I happen to have a lot of training in that. But when you start talking about evidences for the resurrection, that sort of goes beyond that training. I was not trained as an apologist, by the way. So, so this is really outside of my wheelhouse. I will say, though, that early church tradition does seem to suggest that basically Christianity believed in the resurrection from its inception. So I would say that probably the strongest evidence is the tradition of the early church itself. Okay, but beyond that, I mean, you could always appeal to the idea that the tomb was guarded, because it was guarded. There was a stele that was put up by the Romans, basically forbidding robbing of tombs. There was so there are some things like what's it called now? What's the idea that the disciples would try to would be willing to die for a lie. Now, I think that's kind of a weak one, because there's lots of people who are willing to die for a lie. Okay? Because they don't know it's a lie, because they believe it based upon a faith proposition, not because they saw it themselves. So I think the whole idea that the disciples would die for a lie is probably one of the weaker sort of evidential points. But I also think, too, that a lot of people saw Christ walking around. And a lot of people claim to have seen Christ walking around. So I think that is probably a stronger, say, line of evidence than, say, the whole willing to die for a lie thing. But it's not something I've really examined in detail and really focused on either. So I don't have a really good answer for this. Again, it's outside of my wheelhouse. So anyway, I hope that helps. Thank you for the super chat. Really appreciate it. But again, it's really not in my area of expertise. Okay, the next super chat here is from Andrew Guler. Thank you very much for the super chat, for this very generous super chat. We really appreciate it. He says, I've heard that in ancient Hebrew there are no vowels. Not quite, but go on. If so, how do we know that the letters David are supposed to be read as David rather than Davod, Dived, or any other combination of vowels? Okay. It's not that there were no vowels. It's that there were no vowels written down. Okay? There were vowels. Ancient Hebrew had vowels. They just weren't recorded. Okay? Now, we do know that there is, when Hebrew starts recording vowels, it records it in the Masoretic system. And we're talking here about medieval Hebrew at this point. So when Hebrew sort of transitions to medieval Hebrew, This is when we start getting vowels recorded in the written text. So, like the Masoretic text records the vowels with the Masoretic pointings. Now, the problem here is going to be that there are two systems of Masoretic Masoretic pointings. One called the Tiberian system, the other one called the Babylonian system. The one that's used in most of our Bible's translations today is the Tiberian system. Okay. The Babylonian system is still around, and there's still text written in the Babylonian system. But the vowel pointings are different. And we're not exactly sure which one's correct. So, personally, I'd love to see more research done on which of the vowel pointings is correct. But what we call, say, David here, the vowels that we supply in our text, are a result of the Masoretes and the work that they did to put the vowel pointings in. So, I don't have... I think the general patterns of the Masoretic pointings are correct, but some of the specifics may have shifted over time. And that's not uncommon for a language anyway. There's often vowel shifting and consonant shifting, and that stuff happens in ancient languages. This is why there's so much emphasis on the consonants instead of the vowels. Okay. So I hope that helps. I know we don't know everything about how ancient languages work, especially when it comes to vowels, but they do tend to fall into certain patterns too. And one of the things I will say, though, is in languages where vowels are recorded, like Akkadian, the Semitic vowel patterns that are used in Akkadian do seem very similar to the Masoretic pointings. So that's led a lot of people to say, yep, Masoretes got it right. Because they are very similar to what we find in, say, the Akkadian pointings. All right? So, hope that helps. Thank you for the super chat. Very much appreciated. All right, Andrew Gooler again for $20. Again, thank you for that very generous super chat. The Bible usually presents the Israelites fighting defensive battles against the Philistines. What was the objective? What was the objective to the Philistines in attacking Israel? To conquer, to settle, to secure trade routes. Oh, this is interesting. Oh, this is so interesting. I love this question. I absolutely adore this question. What is the Philistines and the Israelites fighting over? It's so simple, and yet it creates this long war. They're fighting over agricultural land. They're fighting over the Shephelah, this little valley that goes north to south, that sort of divides the Judean foothills from the coastal plain. It's a valley of fertile agricultural land. This is an agricultural war. They're fighting over food. That's what they're fighting over. And the Shephelah Valley has hills on the east and hills on the west. The hills on the east are fortified by Israelites. There's Israelite cities all the way down those foothills on the east side of the Shephelah Valley. On the west side, all the way down those hills, are Philistine fortresses. And they're all fighting for the land in between the two set of hills. Two set of fortresses. Yeah, Ryan says it's an agro war. Yeah, it is an agro war. It's an all-out agro war. That's what they're fighting for. They're fighting for the land to feed their people. That's it. Bolognius Monk says, so it wasn't so much them asking for what's your beef, bro, but rather where's your beef, bro? Yeah, pretty much. Yep. Mama says, this is why I asked you, is Samson burning the fields as a war crime? He was destroying wheat and orchards. Yeah, he was. Because again, this is an agricultural war. That's what this is. It's farmers trying to fight over what little agricultural land is there. Clypia says, funny how often these seagoing raiders are motivated by want for food. Yeah. Yeah. But that's what this is about. It's an agricultural war between two different nations fighting over a very, very precious strip of arable land. Because the way the land works in Israel is a lot of the rock is in the Judean foothills is an iron composite. Okay, it's an iron composite. So the Judean foothills themselves are not very fertile. But those rocks break down with water erosion. And those rocks from the Judean foothills during the seasonal rains wash into the Shephelah Valley, where that broken down iron-rich soil, because at that point it becomes soil, becomes trapped in the Shephelah Valley. So the Shephelah Valley is very fertile. Much more fertile than the Judean foothills, much more fertile than the coastal plain. Everyone wants it. It's precious land because it's incredibly fertile. So that's what they're fighting for. It's not for trade routes. It's not to conquer and settle. It's to feed their people. And both sides wanted it because it's a really precious strip of land. Okay, so hope that helps. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Andrew Gouler for $10. Thank you for the super chat. Do you think Nimrod was a Hebrew name for Gilgamesh? No, I don't. Or do you see them as two completely different people? Okay, let me explain what I think Nimrod is. I think Nimrod is a literary composite. We do see these literary composites or amalgamations in all sorts of places in the Hebrew Bible. Okay, so this is not unique. A literary composite is when you take many people, sort of mash them together, and treat them in literature as if they're one person. Okay? The Pharaoh of the oppression is such an example. We know from the deeds in Exodus chapter 1 that the Pharaoh of the oppression wasn't just one king, it was many kings. But they're being treated as a literary unit because it makes the narrative easier to write. You don't have to say King such and such did this, King such and such did that, King such and such did this, King such and such did that, King such and such did that. You can treat them as, oh, this king, he did all these things. It's an easier way to write and a more compact way to write. Okay? So I think Nimrod, given that he's been ascribed for the founding of Kelna, of Assur, of all these different cities that have different points of origin, I think it's more probable that Nimrod is a composite literary character. He's also tied with the subduing of the Mesopotamian plain as sort of beating back the wilds to make it appropriate for human inhabitation. Okay? So So I would basically call him a literary amalgamation. I don't think it's one person, and I think it's kind of um I think it's kind of irresponsible to try to tie him to a specific literary figure because there's just too much evidence that seems to indicate that it's not just one person. Okay, so I hope that helps. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay, Jonathan Walker for $5. Thank you for the super chat. It says that Omri ruled 12 years, 1 Kings 16:23. Yeah. But your chronology has 6 years. Why is that? Because his first 6 years was contested with the previous king. That's why. Okay. So, pull up my chronology here. So we have Omri here, and Omri is the result of a civil war. There's a 4-year plus civil war going on there. Okay. So it takes a while for him to establish his reign. So he doesn't get it at the outset. He has to fight. He has to. I mean, he's going back into the house of Basha, and he's already starting to do his his uprising at that point. So even though it says he reigned 12 years, he didn't reign completely for 12 years. He only reigned independently for about 6. So when we do a chronology like that, what we're going to do is we're probably not going to include the contested years, or basically, if we do include the contested years, show them as overlapping with other reigns. So that's why we show it as 6 years in the chronology instead of 12, because he only ruled independently for 6. He had complete control for 6, and that was sort of when he sort of subdued all his foes. So I hope that helps. Thank you for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. So King David only reigned for 38 years yet? Yeah, because he ruled at Hebron. He ruled at Hebron, I think, for 7, if I recall correctly. He ruled less than 38 though. As king of all Israel. Because there was a civil war between him and Saul's posterity, Ishbosheth. Okay, so yeah. Okay, Tom Wanchek asks a member question here. Thank you for the question. What is the major significance of the Dead Sea Scrolls that you would recommend? Any books on the topic? Wow. I don't do a lot of casual reading on the Dead Sea Scrolls. If I do work on the Dead Sea Scrolls, I usually use a standard reference text. And that standard reference text is called Discoveries in the Judean Desert. Now, I don't recommend anyone go out and buy it unless you really, 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 really want to get into Dead Sea Scrolls research. Okay? It's a 40-volume set. It's really expensive. Okay? Really expensive. Discoveries in the Judean Deserts cost something like $250 a volume. Really, really expensive. Okay? But if you're doing a lot of research on the Dead Sea Scrolls, that is the publication that you want to tap into. Okay, it's the best. I mean, it's unsurpassed. Okay, as far as its publication of the actual scrolls, etc. I can't recommend any other, lay works on the subject, because I don't do a lot of reading on that. I mostly use the Dead Sea Scrolls for text criticism. So for me, my use of the Dead Sea Scrolls is pretty specialized. But I'm sure there are some good, introductions to it now. What you may want to look at is perhaps some works by Emmanuel Tove. He does a lot of stuff on text criticism. He's probably one of the better writers on the Dead Sea Scrolls. So that's probably who I would recommend is Emmanuel Tove's work. His work's very good. Okay, so that's probably the best guidance I can give you here on this. I'm not an expert on Second Temple period literature, but that's what I would recommend. Jonathan Walker, does it include all the texts and the translations? No. It includes the majority of texts and the transliterations. Okay? So if you read Hebrew, it works. Doesn't necessarily give you the translations. Okay, so no translations, just transliterations. So you kind of got to know Hebrew to use it. But again, that's sort of what you're going to have to come down to as far as that goes. So, the best, what was it now? There was a project that was trying to actually take all the Dead Sea Scrolls and include them finally in a biblical translation, Bible translation. I think it's called the Hebrew University Bible Project, if I remember correctly. No counting on my memory at 9 o'clock at night here, okay? But the Hebrew University Bible Project, I think it was what it's called, is try to make a text critical edition of not only the standard biblical text, but the Dead Sea Scrolls as well. And it's one of those translations that where they produce a book like once every 5 or 10 years. Okay? It's nowhere near complete. In fact, our grandchildren will probably be old and gray by the time they complete this. It's taking them so much time to do this because they decided to try to do it right. So far, they've only produced very small books like Habakkuk, Ruth. The really small books. They haven't even tackled the big ones yet. But they're trying. They're trying to take every text critical. The apparatus on that thing's huge. It's huge. So, that's a resource too if you want to sort of get into how the Dead Sea Scrolls compare to the other text types, but it's a very expensive edition when you can get it, and it's not by no means complete. So, hope that helps. Thank you for the question. Very much appreciate it. Tom Wanchek for $2. Thank you very much for the super chat. Really appreciate it. Is the Book of Job possibly a myth of history? Yeah, sure. I can't see why it's not a myth of history. It's definitely poetic. It's structured as a poetic narrative. And when you get poetic narratives, a lot of those poetic narratives are mythohistory. Probably one of the ones that comes to mind is the Iliad. It's poetic mythohistory. So yeah, I think it's one of those things where treating the Book of Job like mythohistory is probably a good idea. It would be a great way to start reading that if you were to read Job. I will say this though, read Job when things are going well. Don't read Job when things are not going well. Okay? It's meant to be, the Book of Job is meant to be read by people who have everything in the world. Okay? If your family's doing great, your job's doing great, you're wealthy, you're getting lots of prosperity, all of that, that's when you read Job. So that's sort of where I would land on Job. I think it is mytho-history. But there's a lot of good stuff to be plumbed out of it too. Just because it's mytho-history doesn't mean it didn't happen. It just means it's recepted in a way that elevates it to the to interaction with divine beings. So I hope that helps. Thank you much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Messianic Talmud for $10. Thank you for the super chat. When Yahweh defeated the Egyptian pantheon and the new kingdom's greatest pharaoh, was this a message to the other nations of the ancient years and their gods? No. Yeah, I think that's sort of, although, I mean, I think this is, first of all, a pointed question anyway. This is what's called a complex question, where if you answer it just at face value, you sort of agree with a premise that Yahweh in the Exodus was about defeating other gods. That's not necessarily what's going on there. Okay? So, I don't agree with the conditional, so I don't agree with the message either. The second part of that, the apodosis. So, I don't think this is a greatly formed question. I think it's a better question to ask. Was the Book of the Plagues of the Exodus an attempt to defeat the Egyptian pantheon? And I think the answer to that's no. I don't think that was the point of it. I think there are very, very culturally ingrained reasons why the Exodus plagues happened, and happened the way they did. More than just, say, a surface treatment of their religion, which is what I think present commentators have been doing. Is I think they've been using a very surface understanding of Egyptian religion to try to sort of then infer that this is a Yahweh defeating the Egyptian pantheon. It seems much more to me that Yahweh's interaction with the Egyptians was more that the Egyptian pantheon was nothing at all. Nothing at all. And that the message that Yahweh was sending the Egyptians was much more of a cultural message than it was, say, a theological one. Clypeus. The real reason plagues happens was so that Voldemort and Val could have a sick duet 3,000 years later. Hey, it's all that singing, that musical theater. We all love musical theater. Oh boy. Oh boy. Hey, we all know the best part of the Exodus was the musical theater, right? Oh boy. Yeah, so I think unfortunately, Messianic Talmud, I think your question's malformed. So I'm just gonna have to say that I don't think it was the former, so it probably isn't the latter. Okay. Next one here is from John Bullerman. Hey, good to see you tonight, John. For $20, $5 Canadian. Thank you so much for the super chat. Of the divine virtues, can you help me and a friend distinguish between faith and hope because they seem to overlap to us. Okay, this is a really good question. Oh my gosh, and we probably don't even know why this is a good question. Um, when I get excited about a question, there's something that most people don't get here. Yeah, that's what we're gonna do here. Okay. Um. Okay, faith is had to have trust in something. Okay. Uh, and the Greeks calls this pisteuo. Okay, and it is pisteuo has three components, which is intellectual assent, it is trust, and it is fidelity. You believe something is true, you trust in the truth of that statement, and you're going to abide by that trust. That's faith. Now, the tricky part here is hope. Oh boy, is hope tricky. Because it's not tricky in the Greek, it's tricky in the English. Most people don't know the that the word hope has changed radically in the last 100 years. It's a word that's changed almost flipped on its head in the last 100 years. It's really a strange thing in Egypt, a strange phenomenon in Egypt. Okay? Hope used to just mean expectation. That's what it used to mean. The idea of hope as in there's some doubt that something is going to happen. Okay. This is a usage of hope that only happened starting in the early 20th century. And it's really, really interesting when you look at, say, the history of the English language. The whole usage of hope for did not exist prior to the 19th century. Now, it's really interesting because in English we have no other word that would satisfy this term hope for. The idea of, okay, like for example, if I said, I hope for a big gift from a donor. There's an expectation there that there's the connotation there is I may get a big donation from a donor, I may not. But it's not sure. That's not how the word hope was used, say, 300 years ago. The word hope was the same as what we would call today expectation. So if I say, I hope for a check, that used to mean I expect the check. It's coming. It's coming. And unless something really, really crazy happens, I'll be getting that check. The idea of hope for as being something iffy is something that's relatively new to the English language. It wouldn't surprise me that if in 100 years Bible translations start changing that elpizo, the Greek term here is elpizo, to expect or to hope. It would not surprise me if that change, if translators start changing that to I expect. Okay. It would be shocking to me if in 100 years we don't start changing all our translations to reflect that new that more up to date, because the term hope has changed so dramatically. And it's happened over such a short period of time that translators have not caught up. Okay, so how do you distinguish between faith and hope? Faith is trust. It's belief, it's trust, it's fidelity in. Hope is the expectation. So you have faith in Christ in the expectation he will return. You're not saying you doubt his return. You expect it. So there's not an overlap there. They're different words. The problem is, with the change of the word hope in the English language, it's become an overlap. So it's very, very different, but it's a really, really fascinating piece of linguistics. And it's a fascinating piece of linguistics that's happened to English. The meaning of the Greek's the same. The meaning in the English has changed. And English being a language that's in constant transition and change, yeah, this is not unexpected. Okay? So, really interesting question. I love this question. This is a fantastic question. I'm really, really excited that I could, amplify on this because it has such an interesting linguistic history. Okay, so I hope that helped. Thank you very much for the super chat. Really, really appreciate it. And great question. Wow. I love that question. That was such a great question. Okay, Jonathan Walker for $5. Thank you for the super chat. Is Eve's name Kava in the second tense Kave? She lives part like Yahweh, and is a second tense of Yahweh. I am swaps out. Hard to say. It's hard to say. It's possible. It's possible. I think there needs to be some more work done on Hebrew, and I would love to see somebody do, because I think there are instances like this. I think you've pointed out a very interesting possibility here for a second tense. So I think there is a lot more that Hebrew researchers need to do just looking at the potential for a second tense of Hebrew. I mean, I would do it myself if I had the time, but I don't have the time. But I think that there's a potential for a PhD there. PhD there that looks at, say, a second tense in Hebrew. Because I think we do know that second tenses do exist in a variety of Mediterranean languages. So it would seem kind of strange to me that, well, Hebrew has no second tense. So yeah, I think this is a possibility, and I think it's a good example of a potential second tense. So yeah, I think your keen eye has pointed it out there. Good job. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, John Bullerman for $5 Canadian. Clogging my sink, I looked down the drain and saw that the drain extends a whole 2 kilometers below, even though I can only see down the drain 2 centimeters. Mamma mia. Well, you need those aliens. You need those aliens to come and excavate out that drain of yours, just like they did at the pyramid at Khafre. That's the problem. You need an alien plumbing service. The aliens dug Jacob's well. Okay. Yeah, those. I don't get why these aliens want to dig holes all over the earth for no good reason in places where it doesn't make sense. I mean, they come to our planet and they start digging holes in it. I mean, don't they have better things to do with their time? Clypeus, they're angels and they want the earth to be holy. Dossman, honestly, if I was an alien, I would do that for LLLs. That makes no sense. I mean, I don't get it. Why do they? I mean, they spend all that energy traveling light years, and then they just dig up holes in the ground. Oy boy. No, just doesn't make a lot. It makes no sense at all. Jonathan Walker. As a kid, we dug up holes in the yard for fun. Yeah, sure. As a kid. But why would aliens do this? You know, that's actually a good exclamation as any. My producer says because they dig up holes because they don't get exercise on the spaceship. That makes sense. Ryan says maybe alien kids. Count of Mercy. Crop circles. Yeah, okay. Again, why? Clypia says, Dr. Falk, maybe they're just fans. They dig us. Ooh, ow, ooh. Oh boy. All right, let's Bubble Machine. Maybe they're searching for gold on the Giza Plateau. There's no gold on the Giza Plateau. Alien bunnies digging holes? Sure. That's a bone that makes, yeah, sure. Sound foxes, alien bunnies that dig holes. Ooh. Okay. Well, that was fun. Let's see. Next super chat here. Okay, Mrs. Trash Rat. Wow, long time since I've seen Mrs. Trash Rat here. Good to see you. For $5. Thank you for the super chat. And she goes, hello, on the ethics of student AI use. Where do you think the boundaries lie, fair use versus cheating? AI can be a great learning tool. Okay, here's what I think. AI can give you a start, like, say, Wikipedia. Okay, now anyone who just copies from Wikipedia would be in the same sort of category as someone who cheats with AI. Okay, that's both cheating, and it's not very good. Okay, Wikipedia and AI can give you a start if you know nothing at all. Okay. Now, if you're going through a class, you should already be at a point where you don't need either. Okay? Unless you haven't been paying attention. And this is the problem. A lot of students don't pay attention. Students have already, in their class, been given textbooks, or at least told to buy textbooks. They've been given notes in class. They've been given, you know, sort of the framework to do their assignments. Okay? So most teachers are going to give assignments that will fit into the framework that the students have already been given. At least a good teacher does this. Most teachers will do this. Okay? So there's no need at that point to use either AI or, say, Wikipedia. But a lot of students don't do that. A lot of students aren't paying attention in class. They're not taking notes. They're not reading their textbooks. That's when a student is going to start depending on other things as a crutch, such as fair use or source like AI. Okay, and AI is a crutch. It's a crutch here to try to limp along to get the grade so that they can move on to the next class when they haven't done the class. So the boundary is going to be, is the student using AI to write the paper for them? Or is the student using it as sort of foundational material to then go and do the research themselves? Now, if they're using AI to do the research, then that sort of crosses the line, because when a student is given an assignment to do a paper, they're told to do the research. Okay? They're told to do the research. They're told to do the writing. So if they use it to help them as a research aid, it's borderline. It might be, it's not cheating that you can catch them on. But it's also circumventing the purpose of the assignment. Okay? So that's when we start getting into gray areas. There's fair use, as in, okay, if you have nothing else to go on, it might be a good foundation. But then you don't stop there. If they're using it to research for them, that might not be catchable as cheating, but it is sort of robbing themselves of the experience of learning to do research. It's when they sort of use it to write the whole paper that it becomes sort of glaringly obvious that's cheating. Yeah. Yeah. And as my producer just said here, the student can't tell if the source is good or not, because you can't tell from the AI. The AI can't tell if the source is good or not. So, Jonathan Walker says, it's like Wikipedia. It's easy to start there, but you never stop there. Exactly. Yeah, you never stop there. And Wikipedia can have some atrocious sources. Some really atrocious sources. So, you got to even be careful with Wikipedia. You got to be super careful with Wikipedia. There's all sorts of crazy stuff on Wikipedia. And essentially, AI is learning from sources like Wikipedia. So, I would never recommend people do paper starting with AI. Okay, I'd never recommend it. But however, I know that some students will do it. Some students will do it. Some students will cheat themselves by sort of skipping the research process and using AI to gather those sources. Not a great idea. Not a good idea. Some students will do it. But some students will have AI write the whole paper for them. That's easily detectable and is clear out cheating. So it's going to be a continuum of grays here between what's a bona fide written paper versus what's a student cheating himself by taking shortcuts versus what's he's cheating outright. So it's going to be, so as I say, a spectrum of grays here. Okay. AI, I would say, has limited value right now as a learning tool. Okay. That's just been my experience with it so far. is I've just seen that it's just not great as a learning tool. There are better ways to get the same information. So that would be my opinion on this. So I hope that helps. Thank you for the super chat. Very much appreciated, and good to see you here tonight. Okay, Micah Price for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Hi, Dr. Falk. Realizing the nature of God changed my entire view. I struggle with Christians who don't and can't view a topic through the lens of God's nature, i.e., holy. How should I show them? Interesting question. Okay. I mean, as far as the attributes of God, the number one attribute that God expresses more than any other is his holiness. That's, even above his power and his goodness and his knowledge. It's his holiness that is the extreme aspect of his nature. Okay, so having a mindset where you see God as holy does change your view of God. Okay? Now, that said, is this something that we should sort of stress when we talk to other Christians? And I think it's one of those things where if you can do it in a casual way, sure, why not? But oftentimes it's not necessary. This is one of those sort of teachings that's better caught than taught anyway. You hope people will eventually come to that a notion that God is holy. But if people don't sort of pick up on that, it's not something you can really sort of force people to learn either. So we got to be a little careful about one thing. Just because we find something very revelatory for us doesn't mean that it's necessarily revelatory for anyone else. I ran into this guy when I think it was at the first or second Missions Fest. I don't remember which one it was. Who was, a young Earth creationist. He was representing a young Earth creationist organization. And, he was telling me about how young Earth creationism changed his life. It changed the way he viewed the Bible. It changed the way he viewed the world. It changed everything for him. Like, okay, yeah, sure. I can believe that. And then he said to me, you should have that view too. Okay, I don't see that as the most important thing in my life at the moment, and he goes, this is why we got this booth out here, to show everybody that young Earth creationism is the most important revelation about the Bible ever. Well, hold on there, pony boy. That may not be exactly true, and might not be true for everybody. Yeah. Mama says here, time and place. Not everyone needs to hear the same thing that just blew your mind. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. This is a subjective thing. So again, you want to be cautious about what is sort of, what changes your entire view may not change somebody else's view. Now, that doesn't stop you from expressing your view. And I think it's one of those things where if you do so in a way that's considerate to others, that's maybe more congenial, that you can have influence in that way. But just because it was change your view doesn't mean it'll change somebody else's view in the same way. Okay. Jack Ray says, I've lost a lot by winning certain arguments. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Some arguments aren't worth fighting. They're not worth fighting. And I would put this probably in that camp of, yeah, okay, realizing the nature of God as holy is certainly important. But it's not worth saying it's the most important, or superlative, or even Micah adds here, it's more of an issue of people arguing about the problem of evil, and for me, I prefer to think of God as holy rather than moral as we understand it today. Yeah, but still, okay, still, it's just, it's one of those issues that if you've, yeah, there is a difference between moral and holy. So, but it is one of those things that you're not going to get a lot of traction on that if their hearts aren't ready for it to begin with. Okay, so I would just express some caution there before you sort of go out on a crusade and try to show them that the nature of God is one that is holy. You're right. You're right. But what's going to be the return of doing that? So, just because you're right doesn't mean what you're proposing here is wise. So, again, I would express some caution there. That's all. Okay, next super chat here is from Jonathan Walker for $5. Thank you for the super chat. What was the process for Moses to talk to Pharaoh? Moses talked to a person and they say, well, he's busy right now. How about tomorrow at 3 p.m.? Okay. The way the process was to talk to Pharaoh is you had to go through his handlers. Okay? And the way the handlers work is they're milling at the gate of the palace. Okay? You walk up to the palace and you go either, hey, I've got a summons here from the king, or I'm a diplomat I'm the ambassador of the Hittite emperor, or I'm the son of the daughter of a king. You present your credentials to the handler. Okay? The handler then brings you into a waiting room. There's a bunch of other people in there. Okay? We have ways of dealing with large animals. Not great ways, just ways. Oh boy. Yeah, it's sort of like that. Okay. Okay, so basically there's a waiting room. There's an ante room before the throne room. Okay? Where basically anyone who wants to see the king is either let in or excluded. And then if you're allowed into the waiting room, you get your chance with the king. That's if he's got time. Okay? So, and they're generally admitted one at a time or in groups. So, they're admitted in and then they get to see the king. So, but there can be those who are refused entry. Now, as a member of the royal family, he's got a right to redress. He's got a right to be heard by the king because he's a member of the royal family. So he can't be turned away very much because there's other members of the royal family who would look at it kind of odd. Every member of the royal family has that right to have an audience with the king. They don't exercise it all that often because you're going before the king. You don't want to be there. Okay? But you have that right as a member of the royal family. But what you said, the process is you see the handler at the gate, you present your credentials, he either lets you in or he doesn't. And once you're inside, you wait for the king to see you. So that's the general procedure there. So anyway, I hope that helps. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Darkblade, would he have still been considered a member of the royal family if he had left the country before his adopted grandfather became Pharaoh? Yes, he would have. Because because him leaving the country doesn't annul the adoption. Okay? The adoption is not annulled by him leaving the country. Okay? So it's not like he loses status if he leaves the country. It's not a green card situation where if you leave the country for a certain time, you'll lose the status. He's still an adopted member of the family. And it is the same clan. So, because he's been adopted into the clan of Ramses, he maintains that member of the royal family status. Now, it's not a close status. It's not a very high status, but it is still a status. So yeah, because he was the adopted daughter of probably the adopted son of the daughter of Ramses I, he had that status. Even if he left the country and came back. Okay. Micah Price says, oops, that wrong one. So the adoption of Pharaoh's daughter sets up his access to Pharaoh later in the story. Yes, it does. Yeah, it's a really interesting aspect of the story. And we see this in not just the Exodus narrative. We also see this in the strike papyri of the Ramesside period, where somebody having this dual status becomes a very important dynamic in the negotiations of labor disputes. Like, for example, we see in the strike papyri where the Magi had this sort of dual status. He actually had kind of a triple status. He was respected by the people, the craftsmen at Deir el-Medina. He could ask for an audience with the mayor of Thebes because he had that sort of rank. And he also was a friend of the vizier. So he was able to tell the mayor of Thebes, hey, look, you think you're hot stuff? You think you're in control here? If you don't attend to the redress of these craftsmen that are owed their rations, I'll just appeal to my good buddy, the vizier, and he will get it done. Nope. And it's a very similar thing to what Moses did. Moses had standing with the Israelites because he was one of them. He had standing with the court, with the Egyptian court, because he was adopted into that. And he has his good buddy, Yahweh, that he could always appeal to if Pharaoh doesn't listen. Ancient History Gamer, it's always good to have friends in high places. Danny Dement. Wow, those scribes who came later and totally invented all of this out of thin air really did their homework on how the Egyptian court had to be run centuries before. Amazing, huh? Could be. Could be. Yeah, I mean, But you get people who do these, try to string the net on that. It's just like, yeah, really, come on. Okay. Danny, you always make me laugh. Okay. Bomb Papa's Basement says, your story reminded me of seeing people at Young Earth Creationist booth 12 years ago, coaching people on how to shame Christians out of believing evolution. Yeah. Yeah, you get a lot of that with them. Jonathan Walker, and the use of Egyptian loanwords, knowledge of Egyptian geography, culture. It's insane. Yeah. Okay. So I hope that helps. Let's move on to the next one here. Okay, Balonius Monk for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. I was pleased to see you mentioned in What Do You Meme's recent video on the Pharaoh discovery. No question for you yet, but I just want to show appreciation. Well, thank you very much for the super chat. Again, as a reminder, we are doing our popcorn review Monday, and we think you'll be very, very interested in this. So, again, 8 p.m. Monday, that's Vancouver time, we'll be doing our popcorn review, which is always a good time. But thank you very much for the support of the channel, and thank you for mentioning the mention on What You Meme. Really much appreciated. Mama for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. She goes, thank you for that immediate and informed answer to Bubble Machine's question tonight. Oh, you're most welcome. Love answering Bubble Machine's questions. She goes, I'm so grateful my kids have you as a resource, even when their questions stray into your producer's territory. Well, we appreciate that you and your children come on to our channel. We love engaging those questions, and we are so glad that we could be a resource for you. Thank you so very much for that super chat, and it's really our privilege and honor to answer their questions. Okay, from JP for $5. Thank you for the super chat. Thoughts on the Gavin versus Dan McClellan dispute on biblical monotheism? Oof. If McClellan says anything, it's probably wrong. Just right out of the gate. I mean, McClellan holds to early polytheism in the biblical text, and I honestly don't see that. I think what we're dealing with in the biblical text is a monarchical monotheism. Now, that's not to say that there wasn't Israelites doing polytheism. There was a lot of Israelites doing polytheism. It's all through the Old Testament, where, the prophets are saying, you bad Israelites, stop being polytheists. Yeah, it's just, and McClellan is just not an honest interlocutor. He's not an honest interlocutor. So I find him very difficult to stomach. He will distort all sorts of things for his particular ideological bent. So I would never recommend him as a source. Polonius Monk says, Dan McClellan, if it conforms to my quote scholarly consensus, it's data. Yeah, it's just. Also, Dan McClellan, if it doesn't comport to my scholarly consensus, it's dogma. Yeah, he wants it both ways. And the fact is, his view of what is scholarly consensus is so subjective that it's really hard to take seriously. And it's just the guy's so hard to stomach. So hard to stomach. Especially when he lies. I mean, and he lies frequently and outrightly. Jonathan Walker. Skeptics. The Israelites worshipped other gods. Judges. Yeah, we know about that. Tell me about it. Yeah. About it. About it. Yeah, it's the difference between descriptive and prescriptive. Yeah, the Old Testament describes polytheism all over the place. That's not the same as prescribing it. The Old Testament doesn't prescribe polytheism. Never in any place does it prescribe it. But it does describe it. And usually in a negative light. Oh boy. Okay, let's get on the next one here. Okay, want to thank Jack Ray for gifting the channel 20 Egypt and the Bible memberships. Thank you so much for your support of the channel. We really appreciate it. The fact is that without your support, we wouldn't be on the air. So we thank you and we appreciate what you've done for the channel. And your support through the generous gifts of memberships has been really a blessing to us and our community. So thank you so very much. We really appreciate it. Jonathan Walker, that's like saying because we have history books describing the Holocaust that we are prescribing the practice. Yeah, pretty much. All right, next one here is from Star Wars Nerd for $4.99. Thank you for the super chat. If salvation is only through Christ, yet those who don't know about him can still be saved, what is the point of evangelism? Is it contradiction? Okay. Let's take this in a couple pieces because there's a issue there. Okay. First of all, everyone's in sort of biblical theology is who really understands the biblical texts knows that salvation is only through Christ. Okay? The question then becomes, what is those who either don't know or rejected Christ? Okay, that's the question. Everyone who accepted Christ believes they're saved. Okay. So that leaves again, those two did not know and rejected. Okay. The point of evangelism is to give people as many chances to accept before it's too late. That's the point of evangelism. Okay? Basically, to inform the people who don't know and to turn around the people who have rejected. Okay? While you're still able to make those decisions. Okay? That's the point of evangelism. It's not a contradiction. Okay? Now, if you have had many chances and you've rejected, there's no second chance. Okay? There's no second chance to be saved. You're done because you have made your choice many times. Potentially many times. Okay? So then that leaves only one category sort of in doubt. Those who never knew. Now, again, the Bible doesn't tell us exactly what happened. What happens to those who never knew. It's not explicit about this. This has led some people to think, okay, that if somebody never knew, they might be given a chance before the throne of God to say, do you want to be with Christ or do you not? And then at that point, it's up to them. It's at that point more of a decision like the angels had. Angels would then have decided either to follow God or not follow God. So in that case, you're then relying on the incredible grace of God to extend it to those who did not know. Okay? So, the point of evangelism is to get people from the point of either not knowing or rejecting to coming to Christ. That's the point of evangelism. So evangelism still serves a purpose. It still serves a purpose. So there's no such thing as just, well, everyone's going to be saved. So because if everyone is going to be saved, yeah, evangelism would be diluted of its point. But if, the point of evangelism is to get people in right relationship with God before it becomes a problem, then it's got a purpose. Okay? So, hope that helps. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay. Jonathan Walker here asks an interesting follow-up question. Would God offer second chance if the person rejected the false teachings of Christ, or would he still hold them to not learning for themselves? That's a really difficult question to answer. Okay. We do know that those who say follow false Christs are condemned. Okay. Because they have followed a different Jesus, a different gospel, and they're deceived to follow after something that wasn't Christ. Okay? But if someone, say, rejects a false teaching of Christ and was never exposed to a true teaching of Christ, that's a maybe. That's a maybe. Okay? Now, if they had no interest in following the true Christ, that could also be an issue. Again, all of this is going to be weighed in the balance of perfect justice and holiness. Perfect justice, perfect holiness, and grace. So, it's a once you get into sort of these really fine points, it gets very speculative. But again, the principles here would apply. So, if someone rejected a false teaching about Christ, but never got a true teaching, that's a maybe. But if someone embraced a false teaching of Christ, then their fate is assured. So again, this becomes a really sort of a nuanced thing at that point, and somewhat speculative. But I hope that helps answer the question. Okay, we got one more super chat here from Messianic Talmud, and that's the last super chat of the night here. So, Messianic Talmud for $10. Thank you for the super chat. Newest argument from non-believers. Exodus doesn't mention the pyramids or the Sphinx. Oh, jeez. Oh, jeez. I'm sure many texts of the Pharaoh don't mention them either, so what's the point? Yeah, that's true. Okay. Yeah, this is not a new argument. This has been around a long time. It's like, yeah, they don't mention the pyramids because the pyramids were really not of interest at the time of the Exodus. The Exodus dates to the 19th dynasty. Okay, you're talking the Middle New Kingdom. Nobody was building pyramids anymore. Nobody was building pyramids anymore. Warrior of the Most High. Pyramids. I mean, the last pyramid in Egypt was built by Ahmose the first king of Dynasty 18. It had been 300-ish years, roughly, since a pyramid had been built in Egypt. Okay? It's like, okay, you know, like talking about, um, like, oh, the big wooden sailing ships, the Clippers. You know, why don't we talk about the Clippers today? It's like, because the last Clipper was built 300 years ago. Ish. More like 200-ish, but still, you know, we don't talk about that stuff today because they're obsolete. Okay? Michael Gee, I read something about England last week, and it didn't mention the Tower of London or the Cutty's Ark. No, I expect it didn't. Clypeus, those darn scribes did too much court procedure world building and didn't research the national monuments correctly. Ancient history gamer. In another 4,000 years, everyone will be talking about clippers. Dossman, I once read an article that didn't mention the pyramid. Is it even real now? Yeah, it just, I mean, look, it wasn't a thing. I mean, it was there in Giza, but nobody at the time of the Exodus in the Middle New Kingdom really cared about pyramids all that much. Okay. Now, Ramses II did do some restoration of the Sphinx. Yeah, that's true. Okay. And he did restore the cult there for a little while. But the average person in Egypt didn't really care about the pyramids. I mean, even amongst the tomb builders, nobody cared about the pyramids. It was just too distant in time. So, yeah, it just makes no sense that, I mean, I hear skeptics bring it up that, okay, yeah, the Bible never mentions the pyramids. No kidding. It also doesn't mention Gobekli Tepe. It doesn't mention automobiles or rocket ships. A lot of things the Bible doesn't mention. Doesn't mention the Great Wall of China. It doesn't mention a lot of things because they didn't matter, or they were out of time and not in the same time frame. Just, yeah. As far as Egyptian documents, even the Egyptian documents didn't talk about pyramids all that much. If it was in close proximity to the time, yeah, if it was, say, a administrator that was helping to build one of the pyramids, yeah, they'd talk about it. But, or if it had to be in some of a mythological reference, you sometimes see that. Like, for example, the Dream Stealer of Tutmosis, the fourth? I think it was the fourth. You know, he talks about the Sphinx, you know, because he has a dream about the Sphinx. Okay. But that's a really oblique reference, a very, you know, out of the way reference. Yeah. Robert Lair says the US Constitution doesn't mention the Boston Tea Party. But did the Boston Tea Party actually happen? Was there tea in Boston? Because it's never mentioned in the Constitution. I want to know. I think they drank Coca-Cola. Dossman, it was a British false flag. It could be. Could be. Hey, there's no drink more American than Coca-Cola. They were drinking Coca-Cola at the Declaration of Independence. Ancient history gamer. It was the Boston Whiskey Party. You know, they were actually producing a lot of whiskey then. Diane Loftus. No, Dr. Pepper. The vault says the pyramids were around before and after the New Testament writings. So what? That seems to show the failure of arguments from silence. Yeah, it is. That's exactly what it is. It's an argument from silence. It's crazy stuff. But you do hear these objections all the time. You know, if the Israelites were in Egypt, why didn't they talk about pyramids? Because they weren't there. They didn't live around the pyramids. The pyramids were not being built at the time of the Israelites. It was no concern to them. None of their labor went towards the pyramids. So it's just like, why would they talk about it? Yeah. Yeah. Clypeus says, Paul never mentioned the Colosseum. Yeah. So, Darkblade, argument from silence is literally a logical fallacy. Yeah. It is. Clypeus at Mama. Let my people go to drink Coke in the wilderness. Ah, refreshing Coca-Cola. Oh boy. Okay, so that was the last. Oh, we got one more super chat here. Actually, a couple more. Okay. Aaron Richard. No, we just took the one on the pyramids. We got one $10 one, and he's got a $5 one too. Okay, Aaron Richard, $10. Thank you for the super chat. Who created the ideas of temples, sacred space, ritual purity, etc.? Was this a general idea in the ancient Near East? It appears to be the latter, which is, it appears to be a general idea in the ancient Near East. The ancient Near East did seem to share certain ideas about gods and goddesses. Okay? And because they shared those sort of common ideas about, say, divinity, those ideas became replicated in the way they did temples, sacred space, ritual, purity, etc. So it seems to be that these ideas were ubiquitous. They just seem to be all over the ancient Near East. Again, we don't know why or how they started exactly, but they seem to go back at least to the 3rd or 4th millennium BC. Okay, so they were around a long time. This is nothing new in the ancient Near East. It was something that happened over a very, very long period of time, and it just seemed to form in multiple places at the same time. Again, because it seems that the people of the ancient Near East had shared ideas of what was it like, what divinity was like. Okay, so it's not something we can sort of specify to one person. It's just something that seems to be a movement across a large expanse of people groups. So I hope that helps. Thank you for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, Aaron Richard for $5. Again, thank you for the super chat. Does sacred space and temples still matter since we have Jesus and the Holy Spirit? That's a great question. It does seem that in the millennial kingdom there will still be a temple. And I think this is one of those things that's often overlooked in, say, modern eschatology, is the whole idea of sacred space and temple in the millennial kingdom. And I think this is a very important factor, because the role of the temple in, say, the millennial kingdom is not going to be one of, say, forgiveness of sin or of sin offerings or anything like that. But it's going to seem to be more along the lines of, this is where we give thanksgiving offerings and praise offerings. It's not going to take on a negative connotation anymore, but a deeply positive connotation of this is what we do as a form of worship. You know, here we have the perfect opportunity to worship God in a temple setting. So, hey, Bonbon, how's it going? Good to see you here tonight. Bonbon's in the house. Okay. Start the stream. Hey, you can't have a party around here without Bonbon. Okay. All right, so, but yeah, it seems to be that, that with the return of Christ, there will already be a Jewish temple in practice, that's functioning, but it's going to be repurposed, not as one that tries to cover up sin, or even that has that sort of mentality, but more of one of praise and worship. So given that you have still praise and worship going on, sacred space and temple is still going to matter. It's just going to be repurposed in a different way. Its understanding is going to get flipped on its head. Okay? So that you bring your offerings to Christ through the temple as a way of praising and, say, glorifying God. So, hey, Bonbon, what's going on? Not gonna be a fun party tonight? You sad? Oh, sorry to hear that. Okay. Well, we'll pray for you, Bonbon. Okay. Jonathan Walker. 4 more hours, right? I mean, the party didn't start till Bonbon got here. Laugh out loud. No, we're not going to be doing not another 4 hours. Okay. So anyway, Aaron Richard, I hope that helped. I hope that explained what's going to happen in at least in what biblical prophecy predicts is going to happen in the millennial kingdom as far as temples and sacred space goes. So hope that helps. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Bonbon says, I probably got a failing grade for an important assignment because my stupid team members who are responsible for submitting the assignment submitted it late. Ooh, feel for you here. Boy, I feel for you. One of the reasons why I always hated working with teams in school. Yeah, working with team members can be very unreliable in a school setting. All I can tell you is you'll survive it. You'll survive this. Nothing boils down to one grade. Okay, I've been through it many times. Okay, I like to say this, that school always has second chances. There's always second chances in school. It might not be what you originally hoped for. Okay, I'll say that. But it's there's all sorts of second chances. There's nothing boils down to one grade ultimately. If anything, they're going to look at your record more than one grade. Okay. So, be encouraged that, yeah, this will pass. This will pass. Okay. Bonbon says, the worst thing is they submitted like 40 seconds late. Jeez. But the teacher is super strict. Oh, gee. That's a martinet. That's martinet thinking. Yeah, that's just martinet thinking. I mean, if you submitted 40 seconds late, good grief. You're talking there a teacher who's living in a land of magic fairies and unicorns. Yeah, I think that's baloney. I mean, that's not even. I mean, that can even be contributed to the position of the clock. So it's like teachers like 1 to 2 years before retirement. He doesn't care. I think. Yeah, you're right. He doesn't care. Yeah. Just no. I would say just tell you, just stick through with it, get through it. It isn't going to matter. It isn't one. Yeah. Yeah. We hope you get that extra 40 seconds of grace, but yeah, lag issues even. Mama said lag issues could even cause that. Yeah. Well, I mean, email can be delayed by. I mean, we think of email as instantaneous, but it isn't always instantaneous. Sometimes it's delayed by minutes or even hours. I remember old email where email could be delayed for 3 days. Email's not an instantaneous thing. So to dicker over 40 seconds is just petty and small. Petty and small. All I can tell you is that that this will pass. This will pass. One assignment is not going to ruin you. Okay? So it's not going to ruin you. Just keep that in mind as you go forward. And then you'll look back after my producer says you'll look back and say this is training for real life because you'll discover people are jerks. She's not wrong. She's not wrong. But you'll look back and think that their opinion didn't matter. Ultimately, it didn't matter. So, well, unless you're getting into like a top 10 college. Yeah, I know you didn't get into Harvard because of that, but as I say, there's lots of second chances in the academy. Lots of second chances in education. It's more important that you get an education that you learn from. Okay? Yeah. Yeah, it's most important that you get educated, not necessarily that you always get the grades you desire. Okay? So just be encouraged that this will pass. Okay? So we hope you get a better night. We'll be praying for you, and just hang in there, Dave. Just hang in there. Okay, we're gonna go on to the next super chat here. From Paul for 1999. Thank you very much for the super chat. Do Jews use the early or late date of the Exodus? Most of them will go late-ish. Some of them will go early, but not many of them. They typically will go by what's called rabbinic dating. And rabbinic dating tends to place the Exodus in the very in the late 14th century, around 1312ish. Okay, so that's much closer to the late Exodus date than it is to the early Exodus date, um which is in the 15th century, I believe. Yeah, 15th century. So they tend to go late-ish than early-ish. Okay, so Dark Blade, I consider that a mid date. Yeah, but it's not really a mid date. Um, Here's the thing: the early date tends to go from 1446 to 1406. So an early date is in that range, depending on whether you're taking the Masoretic text or the Septuagint. Okay, so there are early daters that will go both 1446, and there's some that'll go 1406. Okay, so anything later than that 1406 is considered a late date. So that 1406 is kind of that 1400 mark is the dividing line. That's the line in the sand. An early dater won't cross that line in the sand. Okay? So they'll basically say, okay, 1312, that's way too late for us. Because that's only like 75 years until the late date. So they it's clip. Yes, I had a late date once. Ooh. Ooh. Yeah, that's not fun. So there really isn't a mid date position. Okay. Um so you either got late or early, you don't have mid. So once you get, as I say, once you get past that 1400, you're not in the early date territory anymore. You're in the late at that point. So most say Jews will sort of side in that, say, 1320, 1312 range. So at that point, it's you know, that puts them in most of them in the late date category. But there are some that do hold to an early date, but that's the influence of evangelicalism, American evangelicalism, playing in on that. So okay, so I hope that helped. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Uh, Scott Worthen says there's no one single early Exodus date. I want to clearly state that Josephus. I'm a Josephus Judeo-Catholic early dater. Okay. Um, there are categories of, say, ultra early dating. Okay. Um, the Hyksos would be a ultra early dating. Gerald Aardsma's early dating would be an ultra early dating. You also have ultra high late date too. So, like Rensburg's and um, uh, his Cyrus Gordon would be ultra late dates. Okay, so that's what you would have there. Okay, so there's no one singular early date, but it's a range. It's a range, essentially from 14 to 1500. If you're doing 14 to 1500, you're in that early date. Anything before that, you're in ultra early. Anything after that, you're in late. So, Okay, we're done with the super chats here, so let's take a couple of non-super chats. No non-super chats, huh? Maybe we can call it an early night. Or start a food war. Okay. Okay, yeah, I'll take that one. Okay, Warrior Most High at 923 asks, um, did learning Japanese, kanji, hiragana, katakana, help you with Akkadian cuneiform? Not a chance. It did not help in any way, shape, or form. Uh, how do I say this? Japanese, the kanji, katakana, hiragana were much easier to learn than Akkadian. Um, it was like a lot of Japanese is still pictographic. Like the kanji, a lot of kanji is still pictographic, and that's helpful. That is really, really helpful if you want to learn a language. Okay? Akkadian is not pictographic in any way. It's looking like a bunch of golf tees that got thrown up in the air and scattered on the ground. Okay? It's really hard to read Akkadian, the cuneiform, if you don't know what you're looking at. So, um, so at least with kanji, you got some hints. You got some pictographic hints. Like Mori looks like a tree. He looks like a tree. It's different pronunciations for the same character, but you know what you're looking at. Okay? You're looking at a tree. With Akkadian, there's nothing like that. Everything looks like golf tees. So unfortunately, learning Japanese didn't help. Also, the fact too that Japanese is a pictographic language in places, and then it's phonetic in other, and it's clearly defined by its alphabetics of its character set, is really helpful in learning Japanese. Akkadian, you got nothing like that. Even like, for example, there is ideograms in Akkadian that are kind of used like determinatives, but they look like every other character. Okay, so it still looks like golf tees. There's nothing sort of distinct about them that would sort of mark them out as determinatives. So you're doing that whole trying to figure it out, letter character by letter, biliteral by biliteral, and hoping you can make sense out of it. So yeah, learning Japanese was a lot easier than Akkadian, and Akkadian was just a bear to learn. Okay, I see a new answering LDS had a super chat here. Oh, gotta thank Jack Ray here too, who just gifted the channel 10 Egypt and the Bible memberships. Thank you so much again for your support of the channel. We really appreciate the gift. Oh. 1044. Okay, we'll take that question. 1044. 44. Clypius asks a question. What would the scariest thing to find on Mars be? Life. That would be the scariest thing to find on Mars. Because frankly, the geology of Mars is pretty straightforward. If you find life on Mars, you've got so many open questions, it isn't even funny. You've got questions such as, where did it come from? Is it dangerous? because you have no idea what, say, uh, life on another planet, how it would react to human physiology. Would it destroy our if it escaped on Earth? Would it destroy our agriculture? There's all sorts of scary things that can come out of a living being that are, and it's not necessarily even advanced life that's the scariest. Some of the most primitive life can be really scary. You know, if you've got a disease from Mars that has no cure, or even worse, if it changes epigenetically. You've got, like, for example, it might be perfectly safe on Mars because the Martian soil keeps it passive. But you take that life, put it on planet Earth by mistake, and it turns into an epigenetic plague that just destroys everything. Yeah. And my producer says we can only use decontamination systems for contaminants we know about. Like, I mean, grasshoppers and locusts are actually the same creature. They're the same species. We didn't know that till fairly recently, but one of the things we've discovered is that grasshoppers, they'll multiply and multiply and multiply while it's good, and then the water dries up and so does the food, and all of a sudden they change. They physiologically change. These grasshoppers transform. Their shells get hard and scaly, and they transform into locusts. And it's a scary transformation. So, but that's an example of an epigenetic change where, even life on our planet can change epigenetically with changing conditions. Well, if you've got life on, say, Mars, if you discover life on Mars, how is that going to change epigenetically if it is transported to Earth? Nobody knows that. So, BC, you fools, this isn't even my final form. Grasshoppers, yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I think the scariest thing that they could find on Mars is other life. So, yeah, Ball Machine, I think I'll cap off the night. I'm starting to get a headache once 1 a.m. hits. Good night, everyone. Good night, Doctor and Mrs. Folk. Well, good night to you too, Bubble Machine. All right, we do have a super chat here. We actually got a couple super chats here coming in. Got one from Answering LDS here for 199. Is the Exodus Pharaoh tomb helpful to apologetics? No, it's not. I think you're talking. Are you talking about the one about Amenhotep II? No, I don't think that's helpful at all to apologetics. I think it's actually a pretty poor apologetic overall. And I'll even go as far as to say even the tomb of Ramses II, which we believe is the Pharaoh of the Exodus, I don't think that helps us either. I don't think there's. I mean, here's the thing: tombs tell us, they're when kings make their tombs, they're putting only the good stuff into their tombs. They're putting their accomplishments and their praise to their gods. They're not putting anything that would sort of impeach that. Okay? So, so I don't think that there's that this helps us in any way. So I don't think the tombs are a great resource for apologetics. Now, I think there are some really good resources from Egyptian sources. Okay. One of my favorite resources is actually the late Ramas the late now the late Egyptian miscellanies. These are a set of student texts that date from roughly Ramses II until the end of Dynasty 20. So they give us a really good insight into the Ramesside period, and they're essentially legal documents, a lot of set of legal documents that have been used as school exercises. They were basically student copies that students were making of these papers to learn how to read and write. And they contain a lot of really interesting details that are very applicable to, say, apologetics concerning the Exodus. So I think the late Egyptian miscellanies are much more important source than any particular pharaoh's tomb. I just don't buy that the pharaoh's tomb has any reasonable gives us any reasonable understanding that we wouldn't have without it. Okay, so I hope that helps. Thank you for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay, Jack Ray for $5. He sponsored a question here. He sponsored a bonbon question. Ooh. How do you square the idea of true randomness and God simultaneously existing? If randomness exists, how can God know what will happen? Well, this is what's called a modal scope fallacy. Okay. Many people have proposed stuff like this. Okay, you're not alone in asking this question. Okay, but this would be a modal scope fallacy. Now, you probably don't know that, but God knowing what will happen does not negate true randomness. Okay, it does not negate true randomness. It's just that true randomness can exist aside with knowing the outcome. And why would God know the outcome? Is because he knows the future. Something can be totally random because there's no influence placed upon it. And yet God could still know the outcome of it, even though he had played no particular hey, Sir Kepler, you just doubled that question. Disqualified for the night. You asked that before. We don't do that. Okay, so the idea that true randomness and God simultaneously existent are not mutually exclusive things. Okay? One does not negate the other. So something can be totally random, but God can also know the outcome because he knows the future. So I hope that helps. Thank you for Jack Ray for sponsoring the question, and Bombot, I hope that answered the question. All right. So, but yeah, it's this would be considered to be a modal scope fallacy if you want to know the technical term for it. Like, for example, there's an example of a modal scope fallacy, just to sort of clarify this just a little more, is like, for example, the idea that by definition bachelors are unmarried men. Therefore, a bachelor cannot marry because he would be then no longer a bachelor. That's an example of a modal scope fallacy. Just because, let's say, John is a bachelor, he's not prevented from marrying because he is defined as a bachelor. Okay? It doesn't stop him from being married. Okay? So that's an example of a modal scope fallacy. So just because God exists and can see the future doesn't prevent true randomness from existing. So, if you want to know more information about that, look up the modal scope fallacy. It's very interesting stuff. Okay. Bonbon asks the follow up here, but doesn't God know the outcome of every event? Yes, but here's the thing: it's not just every event, but it's also every contingency too. Okay, but that's an example of his omniscience, his all knowing nature. Not necessarily that doesn't necessarily mean that every event is already determined. There's a section um in the book of Samuel. I don't remember it off the top of my head exactly the verse here, but God tells David. David wants to go back to Jerusalem to pick up his wife Michal, Saul's daughter, because he married her and Saul's about to give her away to somebody else. And God says to David, if you return to Jerusalem, Saul will capture you and put you to death. Well, David doesn't go to Jerusalem. How does God know if David goes to Jerusalem that he would be put to death? This is something called middle knowledge. It's where God not only knows what actually will happen, but he also knows what are the potential contingencies if someone takes the other fork in the road. God knows which fork you will take, but there are several forks you can take. Okay? So, so there's God didn't prevent David from going to Jerusalem, but he warned David not to go to Jerusalem. It's a different thing. So that doesn't, just because God knows every event, doesn't mean that the future is determined. It only means that God knows the outcome. But knowing the outcome doesn't mean that you've affected it. The IRS knows that every year there'll be a lot of tax cheats. The IRS doesn't make people cheat on their taxes, but they know every year there will be a large number of tax cheats. So just knowing something doesn't mean it's going to affect the outcome. Sure. Jonathan Walker says, of course, the warning played a part in David's decision making. Yes, it did. But again, it's not determined. Bonbon goes, this implies there's some kind of observable pattern. Well, there might be. But God also is outside of history, too. He's outside of time. He can see all of time at once. He goes, unless God doesn't rely on patterns like humans, so you could have randomness, but only this kind of way of apprehending applies to God. Yeah. Yeah. The kind of apprehending where you can see all of history at once. Augustine calls this says that God is outside of time. That's how he knows how everything's going to turn out. Because he's not in time, he's outside of it. And because he's outside of time, he can see all of time all at once. So, with knowing that, sort of having that sort of transcendent view of divinity over time, God can see it all take place, even if he doesn't influence every decision. Maybe. Bonbon goes, yeah, but that's another thing I was confused about. If God is outside of time, how can he change anything? How can he act? Oh, that's easy. He intrudes into time. It doesn't prevent, because he's outside of time, his essence is outside of time, doesn't prevent him from intruding into time. This is like where we see, for example, at Mount Sinai. God is intruding into history. Okay? God can intrude into history at any point to, say, affect things the way he wants them to go. Okay? But that doesn't mean he's going to influence everything within that intrusion. Okay? So that's how we can change things, is he can intrude into it. So Bauman goes, I guess the God is the cause of time itself, so he has ontological priority. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. He's got ontological priority. So he can intrude into time. He can alter it. He can do whatever he wants because he's sovereign over time. Okay. So I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the super chat, Jack Ray, and I hope that sort of covered it for you, Bon Bon. Okay, next one here is from Aaron Richard, $5. Thank you for the super chat. He asks, what's your interpretation of the binding of Isaac in Genesis 22? Oh, yeah. Throw me the most controversial passage in the Old Testament. Okay. Oh, Genesis 22. Okay, this is I will say the Binding of Isaac is the most controversial, one of the most controversial passages, and it has been for 3,000 years. Okay, it's every rabbi has debated this passage. Everyone, there's 1,000 different opinions on this. I think we even had a question last week on this passage. It's one of those passages that just sort of people never stop debating over. Okay, so let's read the passage, and I'll just give you some cursory thoughts because I'm not going to come down on a side on this. Okay. Genesis 22:1. Now it came about after these things that God tested Abraham. Okay, so God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he said, here I am. He said, take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering. Okay. Now, the whole idea is to offer. That's what he's been called to do. Offer him as a burnt offering. Okay. So that's the job. The job he sets out is to offer him as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I will tell you. So Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey and took 2 of his young men with him and Isaac his son. And he split wood for the burnt offering and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. On the 3rd day, Abraham raised his eyes and saw the place from a distance. And Abraham said to his young men, stay here with the donkey, and I and the lad will go yonder, and we will worship and return to you. Notice he's either lying to his retainers here, or he's very hopeful he's going to come back with his son. Okay? So, because he does use the we will. Okay? So, does Abraham trust that God will save his son through this, or is he just lying? We don't know. Okay? This is again one of those controversial passages that, rabbis will go in both ways on this. Okay? And verse 6. And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son, and took his hand, the fire and the knife. And the 2 of them walked together. And Isaac spoke to father and said, my father. And he said, here I am, my son. And he said, behold, the fire and the wood, but where's the lamb for the burnt offering? Verse 8. And Abraham said, God will provide himself the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. So the two of them walked together. Then it came about at the place of which God had told him, and Abraham built the altar there and arranged the wood and bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Okay, so now he's offered his son. Abraham stretched out his hand and took the knife to slay him. But the angel of the Lord called down from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. And he said, Do not stretch out your hand against the lad, and do nothing to him, for I now know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And Abraham raised his eyes and looked, and beheld behind him a ram caught in the thicket by his horns. Abraham went and took the ram and offered up for a burnt offering in place of his son. Okay. And Abraham called the name of that place, the Lord will provide, as it was said to this day, in the mount of the Lord it will be provided. Okay. So that's the text. Now, there are rabbis that think that God had intended to do child sacrifice here. That was the whole intent. And there was an instant get out of jail free card because he had mercy on Abraham. So there are rabbis that take that view. There are those like me who say that God only required Abraham to offer Isaac up, but then it was up to God to say, okay, as long as to stop this thing, okay. So stopping was always part of the plan. So, and from what I can tell, it seems to have been the stopping of the sacrifice was part of the plan. And again, based upon the idea that it was to offer, but not necessarily to consummate. So the wording here, I think, is very particular. And also, I think the idea that Abraham is hopeful that he's going to return back to his retainers with his son. So again, trusting in the goodness of God to not want the life of his son. So, but again, the interpretations of this passage are all over the map. Everyone has different interpretations of it. It's one of the most debated passages in the history of the Bible. And a lot of different people are going to have very different views on this. So, yeah, Jay Rusky says, for now I know. Yeah, the whole idea of that plays into this too. Now. Where do I see it now? Yeah, here. For now I know you fear God. Okay. Now, it's one thing for God to know this in a sort of basically a theoretical sense, but this is here, this whole idea here of knowing, yada. It's not even so much the now that's really interesting here in verse 12. For now I know that you fear God. The whole idea of knowledge here. This is not just a know, this is an experiential knowledge. And I think this is one of like to know sin. You will know good and evil. Well, that know in good and evil is experiential knowledge of good and evil. So, Clypeus asks, experiential knowledge? Yeah, it's knowledge you gain through experience. Okay. It's one thing to have, like, for example, theoretical knowledge of how to pick a lock. Experiential knowledge is when you actually pick a lock. Okay? It's the actual knowledge of doing something or experiencing it yourself. Okay? So there's the whole question of then experiential knowledge is something that you have been in the presence of an experienced. Okay, so in the case of God has that theoretical knowledge that he can predict what Abraham will do, but Abraham has never done that in his presence. So this is more the assurance to everyone around him that Abraham fears God. So Isaac sees this, that Abraham fears God so much that he will do a sacrifice on his behalf, sacrifice Isaac. So there's a very strong element of experiential knowledge here that, Abraham, yes, he'll say he'll do this, but will he? God knows he will, which is why God sets up the situation. But nobody else does. We don't. What if we had gotten the story a different way? What if we get Abraham saying, well, you know what? I would have sacrificed Isaac because I fear God. But, never did. Didn't have to. That would be a lot less compelling than what we have here in Genesis 22. Genesis 22, we really do know that Abraham would take it this far. Okay? So, the whole idea then is not only that God knows experientially that Abraham will carry out what he says in fearing God. Everyone else does too. So I think that part of the story is actually really important. This whole idea of knowing how far Abraham will take his faith. Yeah. My producer said, even though Abraham has his moral shortcomings, certainly does, he also has incredible faith in God. And this is how we know he has it. Okay? So, Aaron, I hope that answered your question, and I hope it helped. Again, very debated passage, very debated question, and everyone's going to have a different sort of a view of this. But those are some of my thoughts regarding the passage. So I hope that helped. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. Let's see about... Okay, non-super chats? No, I'm not going to answer that. Okay, when's that? 10:44. Okay. Okay, we'll take this one from Darkblade here. How certain are we that the Egyptian loanwords that appear 333 times across the book of Exodus are Egyptian loanwords? We're pretty certain. Okay. Here's the thing. We've got a long history of Semitic languages. We've got Akkadian as probably the representing the eastern branch of the Semitic tree. We've got a lot of Aramaic. We've got a lot of Semitic languages to sort of fall back on. Okay? So we can put together a archaic Semitic language tree from that. Okay? And using that, we can determine what sort of words, basically lexemes, fall into the Semitic branch of family, as opposed to what are found in other cognate languages, like Egyptian. And in the case of, say, the Egyptian loanwords, these have a long, long, long history in Egyptian. These are not just one-offs that occur when they're, interacting. Like, for example, one that pops into mind right now is sesh, which is a type of Egyptian linen. That's a word that goes all the way back to the Egyptian Old Kingdom. Okay, it long predates its entry into Semitic languages. In fact, we don't find it coming into Semitic languages until the Book of Exodus. So we are pretty sure that those are Egyptian words. Some others we also find too, like place names. Those are definitely Egyptian words. So, when you've got a big enough corpus to look at, then absolutely you can sort of narrow this down to saying, okay, these words are Egyptian, these are Semitic words. And it goes both ways too. There are Semitic words that enter into Egyptian as well. But we can trace those as well. Okay? Like, for example, the word for testimony. I'll just have to look this up in the... Here quickly. Yeah, there it is. A dute. And an example of it is in Exodus 16:34. A dute is a Semitic word. Okay? It means to testimony or conspiracy. Okay? This word actually enters into Egyptian in, say, the 20th dynasty, where it becomes associated with the harem conspiracy, the assassination of Ramses III. Okay? It's interesting that they used the Egyptian documents, use a Semitic word here to talk about this criminal conspiracy, an edut. Okay? So here we got an example of, say, a Semitic word entering into the Egyptian language, because edut has a long history in Semitic languages, but it doesn't have a history in Egyptian languages. So you can take that, and you can also flip it the other way around. Is a word does it have a long history in Egyptian, but then enters into, say, Semitic languages? That would be evidence of, say, a Egyptian loanword. So I think that there's more than adequate evidence to say that those Egyptian loanwords, at least the 26, and we're not even counting the place names or the personal names, because they're very Egyptian too. Just the loanwords, I think we have pretty good... The confidence that they are actual Egyptian loanwords is high. Very, very high. Okay? So, I hope that helps, Darkblade. Thank you for the question. Very much appreciate it. Okay, do we have any others? Okay. Okay, Jonathan Walker asks a question here. Any more updates on the Tutmosis tomb? And this is the tomb of Tutmosis II. And this is the one that hit all the press recently. And the discovery of the tomb in Valley C of the West Theban area. Now, The quick answer of this is there haven't been any more updates. And I'm not expecting there be much more, honestly. There wasn't much to this tomb. There was, it was badly damaged. It underwent very bad water damage. And this sometimes happens to tombs in Kings Valley, because Kings Valley is a wadi. It's a wadi. Very few people understand that it's a wadi. What's a wadi? Okay, it's a seasonal river. So what happens is, when sometimes in Luxor they get rain. It doesn't happen very often, like once a century, but they get rain. And what happens is, you get these torrential rivers that go through these valleys, and this is called a wadi. Okay, so in the case of, say, Kings Valley is a wadi, and because of that, a lot of tombs in the Valley of the Kings were damaged by flooding and water. This is why if you go there today, you see these little brick walls around the entrance of most tombs. It's not to keep out the tourists. Okay, a little 3-foot wall is not going to keep out a tourist. Okay, okay, those walls are there to keep out water. Should there ever be flooding? Yeah. Boy, that's correct. Darkblade, the strongest tomb robber in history, dihydrogen monoxide. Yep. H2O. Yeah. Yeah, they've made a mess of tombs. Okay. So a lot of tombs have been damaged by flooding, by Sir Kepler. Egypt is a really damp place, seemingly. It has its moments. I mean, I remember when I visited the Valley of the Monkey, and I remember when I was walking up the valley. I mean, the valley was cleared pretty much, but I remember an old photograph of it from the mid 19th century, and there's this huge, massive boulder at the top. Massive. I mean, this boulder was the size of a house. Size of a house. It had been moved by water. The flash flooding that happened in the mid 19th century just moved it. Okay. So it's just crazy the effect that water has on that environment. Yeah. Celeria Rosencroy says, less that it's really damp on the whole, more that there have been thousands of years for any water to seep in and affect things. Yeah. It's not that it's damp. In fact, it's quite dry. It's very dry there. Very dry overall. But it what happens is that flooding, once a century flooding, will just mess everything up. And there's been a lot of this is why it takes so long to, say, excavate a tomb in Kings Valley, is most of what you're doing to begin with is just removing the fill that floods the tomb. I mean, that's what took so long to excavate KV5. KV5 was the largest tomb in the Valley of the Kings. It's the tomb of the sons of Ramses II. Okay? It took years to remove all the fill at the beginning before they got to the... I mean, it was thought that KV5 was a really tiny tomb. You look at old books on the Valley of the Kings, and KV5 had been known for a long time. Been known for 100 years. But it was thought it was just one room. I thought it was just one room because most of the entrance had been filled with mud and silt and all that. And they thought behind it was just a false door. Well, once they actually cleaned out the mud and the dirt, they discovered, hey, that false door was really more false than door. Okay? So So, but it took them like good 2-3 years just to start digging past the mud and the silt. So it's pretty crazy how much effect those flash floods had on the Valley of the Kings. Now, the tomb of Tutmosis II had been very damaged because it had been filled with all of that mud and silt and all that stuff. So, all the reliefs had been damaged. Most of the what was found inside had been damaged. There was very little left of, say, the ritual. They found a few fragments of ritual furniture in there, a couple cartouches. Really, they didn't find very much. So there's, I don't expect that we're going to, until we get, say, the final report, we might see something interesting in the final report for the Tomb of Tutmosis II, but I'm not expecting that most of it will be of interest to most people. So, but if we see something interesting, we will let the channel know, because that's what we do here. Okay. So, hope that helps. Thank you for the super chat, for the question on super chat. Really appreciate it. Darkblade asks, are there any restrictions on bringing water bottles to these sites? No, there isn't. Almost all the sites in Egypt, you can bring water, bottled water. Yeah, you have to. You have to. Otherwise, you just die of the heat there. No, you can't drink the local water. Well, you shouldn't litter, no, but yeah, they expect everyone to bring bottled water. Everyone brings bottled water because you don't do well if you don't have bottled water. Okay, so you're allowed to bring bottled water into the tombs. You should not let your bottled water fall down and roll down the. You should not let your bottled water escape your control, roll down the roll down the pyramid, and crash open on the bottom. Not that happened on the tomb, on the tour. Yeah. One of our tour members lost control of his water bottle. It bounced down the pyramid shaft, hit the bottom, and broke open. So when you do bring your water into these sites, please have control over your bottles. Okay? Just saying. Poor guy, yeah. Yeah. Fortunately, no one got caught. I'll just say that. Okay. I'm not going to respond to that. Not going to repeat that one from BC. Okay. Any other non-super chats? Or do we get to call it an early night? All right. Jonathan Walker, you said? Okay. Jonathan Walker, did you see Kip's response to IP's response on the obvious couplet in Numbers 27, 7-10? I don't even know which passage is that. The answer is no. I did not see it. Because he's a waste of time. The dude's a waste of time. You know, I got better things to do with my time than to pay attention to Kip. You know? Well, let's see here. Numbers 23, 7-10. And he took up his discourse and said, from Aram Balak has brought me Moab's king from the mountains of the east. Come curse Jacob for me, and come denounce Israel. How shall I curse whom God has not cursed, and how can I denounce whom God the Lord has not denounced? As for him, from the top of the rocks I look from the hills, behold, a people who dwells apart shall not be reckoned among the nations. Who can count the dust of Jacob, or the number the fourth part of Israel? Let me die the death of the upright, and let my end be like this. Okay, I don't get how this is supposed to be a couplet. At least not in a documentary hypothesis kind of way. Okay. So, Kip's just a waste of time. I have better things to do than focus on Kip. I know he's obsessed with me. I know I'm living rent-free in his head. That's fine by me. I mean, the fact is, I've got better things to do. Like write books. It's like, yeah, why would I spend one more moment thinking of him than I have to? Okay, that's a better question than talking about Kip right there. Christian theologics. Who's more credible, Billy Carson or Kent Hovind? Oh boy. Which would you rather eat, arsenic or cyanide? Take your choice. Sir Kaplan. I get that. I heard Vancouver rent is expensive. Oops. I heard Vancouver rent is expensive, so well done for the rent free. Yeah. Everyone's choosing cyanide here. Clivius cyanide, Scottworth and Ditto cyanide. Although you're more likely to live through arsenic, honestly. Yeah, arsenic takes a long time, but you're more likely to live through it. Yep, Arsenic and Old Lace. Yep. Yeah, I remember the play. Yeah. Yeah, neither Billy Carson nor Kent Hovind are credible. Um, it just surprises me how Kent Hovind survives, keeps lingering on, you know. But, there's a new gullible generation every couple of years. Why do people still follow Ron Wyatt? The guy's a huckster. The guy was a con man. But there's been more people follow Ron Wyatt now than when he was alive. I think that's going to happen with Kent Hovind too. Eventually, he's gonna kick the bucket because he's old, and he's gonna have an extended time on the internet where more people are going to end up following Kent Hovind in death than when he was alive. So, yeah, DVC Kent Hovind, the multiple wife jailed apologist. Yeah. That's not an unfair statement. Yeah, just the problem is, these guys are just, even though they've been debunked so many times, they just seem to find new followings. And the internet just seems to feed that. So, yeah, as I said, there's more people today that support Ron Wyatt. And frankly, their ideas aren't just, don't get traction just because they're saying it. It's other people repeating it. Like the whole Jebel Allah's Mount Sinai thing. That came from Ron Wyatt. But so many other people repeated it that it got traction, even though it was completely devoid of any merit. So, it's not even necessarily their first attempts. It's the people who supported it and the repeaters of it, and it just creates this mess. Yep, we got another super chat here from Messianic Talmud for $10. Thank you for the super chat. He goes, did the sorcerers and magicians of Egypt actually have some power from evil spirits or demons, or was it just a magic trick when they confronted Moses and they both produced serpents? That's an interesting question. The Bible doesn't tell us. Okay, the Bible does not tell us which one it is. Okay. Now, we do know that Egyptian priests did perform magical spells. Okay. Okay. We do know that because we got lots and lots of magical texts. A lot of them. Tons of them. In fact, there's whole large works that have been done on magic in ancient Egypt. Okay. Geraldine Pinch did a work on magic. Robert Rittner did probably the best book on Egyptian magic. So we do know that Egyptians practiced magic. Okay. Was it effective? That's the million-dollar question. Some of it was applied pharmacology. We've talked about applied pharmacology on this channel where, they didn't know were using pharmacological things, but they ended up doing so inadvertently. Okay? Kind of like when Jacob puts the sticks into the water trays of his sheep, and they come out healthier. That's a form of applied pharmacology. Okay. So, there may be some aspect of that. There's also maybe some aspect of communal psychology, too, involved in magic. We don't know. But in the case of their interaction with Moses, we don't know exactly what they did, what their methods were. So it's hard to say. They were capable of magic tricks, as in the same way like a stage magician would. We do know they also practiced ritual magic too. But again, we don't know exactly if they had powers from evil spirits, demons, if they used applied pharmacology, applied sociology, or just hocus pocus, pull the rabbit out of a hat kind of magic. Okay? So it's really hard to say. It's really hard to say. And I don't want to guess there because we're not told. Okay? So this is one of those things where it could be, but it might not be either. So depends. And again, there's not one answer for this. It could be something in the middle. Again, like applied pharmacology or applied sociology. So anyway, I hope that helps. Thank you for the super chat. Really appreciate it. Okay, we got one from Jack Ray here. It comes up here. Jack Ray for $5. Thank you for the super chat. Was Moses as a baby being found and brought out of the water a hint of Hebrews coming out of chaos? Like the water chaos representation? I think that might be an overinterpretation. What I think it is foreshadowing. I think it's definitely foreshadowing. I mean, Moses as a baby is put in a reed basket, and he's put among the reeds. And reeds, this is the still part of the water, by the way. Okay? So he's put in amongst the reeds. The thing about being put into the reeds is they're not sending him whitewater rafting. Okay, this is not like Baby Sargon where he's put into a basket and he does whitewater rafting down the Tigris. Okay, it ain't that. Whitewater yeah, it's yeah, no, it's not that. Okay, uh, the waters are the reeds is the sort of the area of the river where it's say the most calm. Okay, so yeah, he's being put amongst the reeds so he can't go anywhere. So the basket doesn't go anywhere, essentially. So, but it seems to be foreshadowing of the Exodus event of the parting of the sea of reeds. So, like the water of the Sea of Reeds was split and the Israelites passed through it, Moses was also placed among the reeds and drawn out from it. So I think this is not as a chaos motif, because if it was a chaos motif, they just shove him down the river and have him do the whitewater rafting thing. Okay, this is not chaos. This is the calm part of the river. And if you've ever seen the Nile is not a rough river. Okay, it's a wide, shallow river. So it's very calm. It's a wide meandering river. So it's not rough, as it were. So there is water doesn't have that chaos motif in Egyptian until you start talking about the inundation cycle. Inundation cycle, yeah, things got wild. Okay, but most of the time, the Nile is a pretty placid river. So yeah, the crocodiles were an issue. Yeah, crocs are an issue. Definitely. The crocs would have eaten them, yeah. But that was what happened at the slaughter of the innocents. Was they were slaying the babies and throwing them in the water for the crocodiles to eat. Okay? But Moses being in a basket probably would have been relatively safe among the reeds. Okay? So, yeah. Andrew Graham, it's not wide water rapid territory, no. Nope. Yeah. Yeah, there were now crocs at the time, but again, uh this is one of those things where say there was a reasonable expectation that he would have been safe at the edge among the reeds. Because first of all, the reeds are generally not places where, say, you find a lot of crocodile hunting trails. Okay, it's kind of a reed patch would have been an enclosed place. You could have seen if a crocodile was in the water there, because it would have moved the reeds aside. So, yeah, huge crocs. Yeah, Egypt had some massive crocs. Really big crocs. There was one I remember that was mummified in the Egyptian Museum that was almost like 30 feet long. Yeah. Yeah, there was a video, my producer reminds me of a crocodile that took down a muskox. Yeah, they're big animals. Big animals. Yeah. Jonathan Rocker, reeds equals safe place to bathe. Yeah, it's your chances of being safe near a reed patch are a lot higher than, say, on a open patch of uh of riverbank. Yeah, that's true. My producer says you'd see the reeds move if there was a predator that was trying to move among them. So yeah, in the Mississippi, don't take shallow riverbank as safe. Yeah, exactly. But in the case of Egypt, um, if there was a large patch of reeds, your chances of it being safe to bathe in are much better than, say, as I say, a straight an open patch. So Jay Rusky, is there any indicator that might be going over my head whether Aaron was older or younger than Moses? It's basically held that Aaron was 3 years older than Moses, and that's because um he is said to be like when Moses is 80, Aaron's said to be 83. So there is that indication that Aaron was the older brother of Moses. So there is some textual indication that Aaron was indeed older than Moses. Not by much, but by 3 years. Aaron Graham, one Google question: is it safe to swim with Nile Crocs? LOL. No way. No, it's never safe. It's never safe. But people did take risks. They didn't swim, by the way. They bathed. This is one of the interesting thing is that you do have people who learned to swim in ancient Egypt, but people try to stay away from, say, the more dangerous areas. Yeah, hippos can make short work of crocodiles too, and you had those in the Nile as well. So you had both hippos and crocodiles in the Nile. So and there's actually some um reliefs in some mastaba tombs of crocodiles being basically made short work of by the hippos. So okay. Let's just take 823. You said 828. Okay, gotta go all the way up. Hmm. So here, 28 up here. 828. All right, we're gonna take one more non-super chat here, and then we'll call it a night. 828. All right. Clypius asks, and this will be the last non-super chat of the night. He asks, why did Ehud turn around at the stone image of Gilgal? Why not kill Eglon initially? Judges 3:19. All right, pull that up here. Okay. Judges 3:19. All right, we'll start at verse 16. And Ehud made himself a sword which had two edges. a cubit in length, and he bound it to his right thigh under his cloak, because he was left-handed, essentially. And he presented the tribute to Eglon, king of Moab. Now, Eglon was a very fat man. And it came about when he had finished presenting the tribute that he sent away the people who had carried the tribute. But he himself turned back from the idols which were at Gilgal and said, I have a secret message for you, O king. And he said, keep silence. And all who attended left him. Okay. And Ehud came up to him, and while he was sitting alone in his cool roof chamber, Ehud said, I have a secret message for you. And he arose from his seat, and Ehud stretched out his left hand, took the sword from his right thigh, and thrust it into his belly. Okay. Why did he turn around at the stone image of Gilgal? Okay. Essentially this. He's playing Eglon the Fool. Okay. Here's what's going on. They're presenting tribute, but they're presenting tribute at the idols of the stone image of Gilgal. So they're going, when the Israelites have to bring their tribute, they come to Eglon, and they're presenting it in front of the gods of the king of Moab. Okay, so what Eglon is doing, what Ehud's doing here, is he's pretending to get a message from the idol. So they present their tribute. They're all facing the idol. And then Ehud turns to Eglon and says, I got a secret message to you from God, for you from God. Okay. This is a ruse. This is a ruse to get him alone. Okay. Now, he could have, whipped out his sword right there and dispatched Eglon. But then now he's got to deal with all Eglon's men. He can't make a clean getaway. He needs to get Eglon alone for his plan to work out. Okay? So that's what's going on there. Is Ehud is basically saying, hey, I've got a message from God for you. Okay? As he's facing the idol, and Eglon's saying, oh, well, God's going to speak to me? Okay. Yeah, sure. I'll let you, we could be alone for you to deliver that secret message. Secret message. So, that's why he turned around. He's bluffing. He's pretending that he got a message from the idol at Moab. So that's the reason for it in Judges 3:19. So I hope that helps. Thank you very much for the question, and very much I hope that was useful. Yeah, we're going to ignore that super chat. Okay, Clypia says, okay, I misunderstood the description of the actions in the story. Makes much more sense now. I thought Ehud left and came back. No. He's presenting his tribute. Yeah. He would have been checked for a sword on the right-hand side, and Eglon's with all his men. There would have been no chance for a getaway. But now he's pretending he got a message from the gods of Moab, and now he can get Eglon alone. Once he gets him alone, he can kill him, and he's got time for a getaway. Okay? So, hope that helps. Again, thank you very much for that question. It was a good question. Okay, we are going to wrap it up here. Yeah, Oreo, you might want to ask that question next week, because we said we're done for the non-super chats for the night. Jack Ray, Addison, that was low effort. Come on. And that's why we're not answering it, because it was low effort. Okay. So anyway, we want to thank everyone who joined us this week. We had some really great questions. Love the faith and hope one. That was a really good question. Bubble Machine gave us an excellent question. There was some really good questions tonight, so it was a really, really good live stream. We want to thank everyone who supports the channel through the super chats and through donations through PayPal. We really appreciate that. That puts food on our table and keeps us being able to do this full time. We're so grateful for your generosity and support of this channel. Again, I want to remind everyone, Popcorn Review, Monday, 8 p.m. Pacific time. Be there. So we also want to thank our Patreon and our YouTube membership supporters, because you guys keep the equipment going, and we've needed some more equipment lately. So we thank you very much for your generous support. You guys have really helped us to cover the costs of those expenses. We really appreciate that. We also want to thank our regular subscribers too, who keep who basically view our content, hit that like and subscribe button, and share the URLs of our content in other social media platforms, because you guys get the message out there. That's it. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. We'll see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible. What? See you Monday.